The morning Morgan was meant to die was colder than any winter in Silvercrest she could remember. Frost had claimed every stone of the courtyard, silvering the ground beneath her bare feet. The wind cut through her thin garments, carrying with it the murmurs of the gathered crowd. Their voices were low and hungry, waiting to witness the condemned Omega finally silenced. Chains rattled at her wrists as the guards dragged her forward. Their armor clinked with each deliberate step, iron meeting iron in a rhythm that counted down her final moments. Morgan did not resist. Resistance had long been beaten out of her, along with any belief that justice existed for creatures of her kind. The lowest born Omega in a kingdom that revered strength above all else had little hope for mercy. The banner of King Alaric hung heavy over the courtyard, black and crimson, with wolves embroidered in gold thread that seemed to snarl down at her as though mocking her weakness. At the far end of the courtyard, seated upon a raised stone dais, was the man who had decreed her death, King Alaric of Silvercrest. They said his eyes were carved from obsidian, sharp enough to cut through lies and see the hearts of those who stood before him. Morgan had never been close enough to see them until now. Even from across the courtyard, she could feel the weight of his stare. Cold, absolute, unmoved. "Bring her forward," his voice commanded, deep and unshaken. The guards obeyed instantly. Her knees scraped the frost as they forced her to kneel. Her breath fogged the air in shallow bursts. She lifted her head just enough to meet his gaze, not out of defiance, but because she refused to let the world remember her bowed. There was no pity in his eyes, only calculation. Around him stood the elders of the court, wrapped in heavy cloaks. Their whispers were a hiss of satisfaction that carried across the silent courtyard. "Traitor's blood," one muttered. "She betrayed the pack," another hissed. Morgan wanted to scream that she hadn't, that the council had lied. But lies once spoken by those with power become truth faster than innocence can be proven. She had learned this lesson over the long weeks of her imprisonment. King Alaric rose, his movement alone silencing the crowd. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his armor glinting in the pale light of dawn. The wolf insignia gleamed silver on his chest plate. Power emanated from him, not wild but restrained, like a beast chained behind calm eyes. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing a face carved by war and rule, with a single scar running along his jaw. She had heard tales of how he earned it, standing alone against 5 rogues to defend his border. "State your name," he said. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Morgan, daughter of no one." A faint ripple went through the crowd. They wanted tears, pleas, something to make their hatred feel justified. She gave them none. The Alpha King's expression didn't change. "You stand accused of consorting with rogues and betraying your pact to the enemy. Do you deny it?" "I do." Her voice cracked, but she forced it out. "I never betrayed anyone. The rogues attacked our borders. I warned your scouts before they came." He stepped down from the dais, slow and deliberate. The sound of his boots against stone echoed like a drumbeat. "You warned them," he repeated quietly, almost to himself. "And yet every scout who survived swore your scent was found at the rogue camp." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Someone planted it. You know scent can be carried." Enough. The single word carried more finality than any blade could. It fell silent around them. The crowd exhaled like a living beast. "By law," he continued, "you are sentenced to death by fire. The execution will be carried out at first light." First light. The sun was barely cresting the horizon. That meant now. 2 guards stepped forward, holding torches. Her chest tightened, breath catching as she stared at the flames dancing in their hands. Fire was sacred to their kind. It burned away impurity, leaving nothing but ashes and memory. For a moment she thought she felt her mother's voice whisper through the wind, the echo of a lullaby she barely remembered. "The flame knows truth," she used to say, "and truth cannot burn." Perhaps she was wrong. The guards forced her upright. Her wrists were chained behind her, her hair matted and tangled from the cell. She didn't fight them when they dragged her toward the pyre. Her body trembled, but her mind felt strangely clear. Every eye was on her, the condemned girl, the nameless Omega. She thought of the forest where she used to run as a child before the wars, before the hierarchy crushed everything soft within her. She thought of the moon and how she had prayed under it once, asking for purpose. Maybe this was it. Maybe her death was the purpose. The pyre loomed tall, built from dry timber and rope, smelling of smoke and resignation. They bound her to the stake. She could hear her heartbeat louder than the murmurs of the crowd. One of the elders stepped forward, his voice booming. By decree of the Alpha King, this traitor shall be cleansed by flame. May the goddess Selene witness this purification. He turned to the Alpha, awaiting his nod. The king gave it slowly. Her lungs froze, the torches were raised. The heat licked the air, and then came a sound. A low growl. Not human, not wolf, something older. The flames flickered, sputtered, and died. Gasps spread through the courtyard. The guards stepped back. Even the king's head turned sharply, his dark eyes narrowing. It is the wind, my lord, the elder stammered. No, the king said softly. It is something else. Morgan didn't understand what had happened until she felt it. The searing pain crawling up her neck like molten fire under the skin. She screamed, jerking against the ropes as light erupted across her throat. A symbol burning through flesh and blood took form at the base of her neck. The crowd fell silent. The king's expression changed. For the first time, his eyes widened, not in anger, but disbelief. He took a step closer, another, until he stood before her, the glow of the mark reflecting in his pupils. Impossible, he whispered. That mark hasn't been seen in a century. Her body trembled. What? What does it mean? He didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the shape burned into her flesh. An ancient sigil, the crescent wolf surrounded by thorns. Around them, the elders began to mutter prayers. One of them dropped to his knees. Another made the sign of protection. The Alpha's voice dropped to a growl. Unbind her! My lord, she is a traitor. Unbind her! The command cracked through the air like thunder. The guards hesitated, then obeyed. The ropes fell away, leaving her wrists raw and trembling. She stumbled forward, clutching her throat, feeling the pulse of something foreign, something alive beneath her skin. The king's eyes locked onto hers. Who are you? Her voice shook. I told you, Morgan. He shook his head. No, not anymore. He turned to the elders. Fetch Victoria, now. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Guards ran. The crowd fell to hushed whispers. The pyre crackled softly, smoke curling into the pale morning sky. She stood there, unbound but not free, shivering as the Alpha King stared at her like a man seeing a ghost. Whatever that mark was, it had changed everything. Moments ago, she was the condemned Omega. Now she was something else, something the Alpha feared. And as the cold wind howled through the courtyard, she realized with terrible clarity that sometimes fate spares you not because you are innocent, but because your punishment hasn't yet begun. The hours after the execution that never happened passed in a blur of stone halls and whispered voices. They had taken her from the courtyard to a tower room, not a cell, but not freedom either. The windows were open to the sky, but a shimmer in the air told her magic sealed the exits. Still, it was better than the dungeons. The bed was soft, water clean, and someone had brought her clothes that fit. Simple garments, but made of wool that kept the cold at bay. Her fingers traced the mark on her neck again. The burning had subsided, but it left a pattern that glowed faintly silver in the shadows. She had glimpsed it in a mirror. A crescent moon cradling a wolf surrounded by a tangle of thorns. It pulsed with her heartbeat, as though it had become part of her very blood. The door opened without warning. King Alaric entered first, his presence filling the small chamber instantly. Behind him came an elderly woman, her white hair bound in intricate braids wrapped with silver thread. Her eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they fixed on Morgan with unnerving intensity. So this is the girl, the woman said. Her voice sounded like autumn leaves rustling underfoot. Victoria, the king acknowledged with a nod. Tell me what it means. The old woman moved forward, her robes making no sound as she crossed the floor. Without asking permission, she reached out and tilted Morgan's chin upward, examining the mark with those ghostly eyes. The moon bond, she whispered. I never thought I would see it manifest in my lifetime. You know of it? Morgan asked. Victoria's lips curved in a small, secretive smile. I am the seer of Silver Crest, child. It is my duty to know of such things. She released Morgan's chin and stepped back. The mark appears only when the goddess Selene herself intervenes in mortal affairs. It is both blessing and curse. The king's jaw tightened. What does it mean for us? It means, Victoria said, that this girl is bound to you, my king, by blood and magic older than your throne. Morgan looked between them, confusion and fear mingling in her chest. I don't understand. How can I be bound to him? I've never even been in his presence before today. The bond chooses, not us, Victoria said. It seeks balance for every alpha, an omega, for every strength, a vulnerability, for every power, a price. She turned to the king. You bear the burden of rule. She will bear the burden of your mortality. The king's expression darkened. Speak plainly, seer. Victoria nodded solemnly. From this moment forward, your lives are linked. If she dies, you die. If you die, she dies. Neither can survive without the other. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples of realization through Morgan's mind. She was no longer condemned to die, but neither was she free. Her life was now chained to a king who had moments ago been prepared to watch her burn. This is absurd, the king growled. Some old magic cannot decide the fate of a kingdom. And yet it has, Victoria replied calmly. For generations, the royal line has been blessed with strength beyond ordinary wolves. Did you think such gifts came without cost? The king turned away, pacing the small confines of the room like a caged predator. There must be a way to break it. Perhaps, Victoria said, but not without consequences that might be worse than the bond itself. For now, you must accept what the goddess has decreed. Morgan found her voice again. Why me? I am nothing. An orphan, the lowest rank. Victoria's ancient eyes seemed to see through her. Are you certain of that, child? Blood remembers what minds forget. She reached out once more, this time tracing a finger along Morgan's cheekbone. You have your mother's face. You knew my mother? Morgan's heart leapt. The council must be informed, the king interrupted before Victoria could answer. This changes everything. Indeed, Victoria agreed. Call them at once. But remember, my king, that what the goddess binds cannot be undone by mortal decree. As the king turned to leave, Victoria caught Morgan's hand and pressed something small and cold into her palm, closing her fingers around it. Keep this hidden, she whispered, so softly that even the king's sharp ears would not catch it. Trust no one until you understand what you truly are. Before Morgan could question her further, Victoria followed the king from the room. The door closed behind them, the lock sliding into place with a final sound that reminded Morgan that, mark or no mark, she remained a prisoner. She opened her hand. In her palm lay a small silver pendant, tarnished with age. A crescent moon, identical to the one now burned into her flesh. Her mother's necklace. The one taken from her when she was first imprisoned. The Council of Silvercrest gathered in the throne room as twilight descended over the kingdom. 3 figures stood before the king, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outrage as Victoria explained the meaning of the moon bond. General Marcus, commander of the royal army, stood rigid in his ceremonial armor. His face, weathered by countless battles, betrayed nothing but his eyes burned with suspicion. This could be a trick, he said. Some rogue magic designed to protect a spy in our midst. Beside him, Eleanor, high priestess of Selene, shook her head. Her silver robe shimmered in the torchlight. The goddess does not lend her power to tricks, General. The moon bond is sacred. Sacred or not, said Thaddeus, the royal advisor, stroking his gray beard thoughtfully. It presents a vulnerability. If the king's life is bound to this Omega girl, his enemies need only target her to strike at him. King Alaric sat on his throne, listening silently as they debated. His eyes were fixed on some distant point, his thoughts clearly troubled. Bring the girl before us, he said finally, cutting through their arguments. Let the council see the mark for themselves. Guards were sent to fetch Morgan. She entered the throne room with her head high, despite the chains still binding her wrists. The mark on her neck pulsed visibly, a silver glow that caught the light. Step forward, King Alaric commanded. Morgan approached the throne, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The council members circled her like wolves evaluating prey. Show them, the king said. She tilted her head, exposing the mark fully. General Marcus leaned in close, his eyes narrowing as he studied it. It could be a forgery, he muttered, a scar made to look like the ancient sign. Touch it, Victoria challenged. Feel its power if you doubt your eyes. The general hesitated, then extended a calloused finger toward Morgan's neck. The moment he made contact, a spark of silver light leapt between them. He jerked back with a curse. It burned, he exclaimed. The mark recognizes threats, Victoria explained. It protects the bond. High Priestess Eleanor stepped forward next, her movements graceful despite her age. She murmured a prayer to Celine before carefully placing her palm near the mark, not quite touching it. The goddess's hand is upon her, she confirmed, her voice filled with awe. This is no deception. Thaddeus circled Morgan slowly, his shrewd eyes taking in every detail. The question remains, what do we do with her now? She stays in the palace, under guard, the king decided. If our lives are bound, I want her where I can see her. My king, General Marcus protested. She was accused of treason. Bond or no bond, the law demands justice. King Alaric's gaze sharpened. And if she is innocent, would you have me execute her and die alongside her to satisfy the law? The general fell silent. There is another matter, Victoria said quietly, the girl's bloodline. Morgan felt a chill run down her spine. The pendant Victoria had returned to her seemed to burn against her skin where she had hidden it beneath her clothes. What of it? The king asked. I believe she may be descended from the lost Moonstone line. A stunned silence followed this pronouncement. Morgan herself did not understand its significance, but she saw the shock register on the faces of the council members. Impossible, Thaddeus whispered. That line was extinguished generations ago. Not extinguished, Victoria corrected. Hidden. After the great betrayal, those who survived went into exile. The king rose from his throne, descending the steps until he stood directly before Morgan. His eyes searched her face with new intensity. Is this true? He demanded. Are you of Moonstone blood? I don't know, Morgan answered honestly. I never knew my family. I was raised in the outer villages after the war. The king turned to Victoria. How can you be certain? The moon bond does not form at random, the seer replied. It seeks balance between ancient bloodlines. Your line, my king, has ruled Silvercrest for centuries. The Moonstone line once served as your counterbalance, advisors with the gift of communion with the goddess. Until they betrayed the crown and allied with rogues, General Marcus added grimly. History written by victors is rarely complete, Victoria said with a pointed glance at the general. King Alaric studied Morgan with renewed interest, as though seeing her for the first time. Whatever he might have said next was interrupted by a sudden commotion at the entrance to the throne room. A guard burst in, blood streaming from a wound on his forehead. My king! We're under attack! The peaceful debate of moments ago transformed instantly into military precision. General Marcus barked orders to secure the palace. The high priestess began chanting protective wards. Thaddeus hurried to gather important documents. Get her back to the tower, the king commanded, gesturing toward Morgan. As guards moved to obey, an arrow whistled through an open window, its trajectory aimed directly at the king's unprotected back. Morgan saw it first. Without thinking, she threw herself forward, breaking free of her guard's grip. Look out! The king turned, but too slow. The arrow would find its mark. In that moment, the bond between them flared to life. Morgan felt a surge of power unlike anything she had ever known. Her mark blazed with silver fire. She reached out, and somehow, impossibly, the arrow stopped in midair, hovering for a heartbeat before dropping harmlessly to the floor. Everyone stared at her in shock. Morgan herself could barely comprehend what had happened. The moment of stunned silence was broken by a second volley of arrows and the sound of fighting in the corridors beyond. To arms! The king shouted, drawing his sword. He cast one last glance at Morgan, a mixture of surprise and grudging respect in his eyes. Take her somewhere safe, he ordered the guards. Her life is mine now. As they hurried her from the throne room, Morgan looked back to see King Alaric striding toward danger, his blade gleaming in the torchlight. For a man who had nearly executed her that morning, she felt an unexpected concern for his safety. After all, his life was now hers as well. The attack was brief but violent. A small band of rogues had infiltrated the palace, their target clearly the king himself. By morning, the rebellion had been crushed, the survivors interrogated and executed. King Alaric had led his guards personally, fighting with the legendary skill that had won him the crown. Morgan spent the night in a new chamber, more secure than the tower room, with guards posted outside her door. She paced restlessly, feeling strange surges of emotion that were not entirely her own. When the king took a minor wound during the fighting, she had felt a sharp pain in her own side, confirming the reality of their bond. The next day, she was summoned to the king's private study. The room surprised her with its simplicity. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient tomes and maps. A large desk dominated the center, covered with documents and a half-drawn battle plan. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. King Alaric stood by one of these windows, looking out over his kingdom. He had exchanged his armor for simpler attire, though a sword still hung at his side. The wound he'd taken was bandaged beneath his clothing, but she could sense its presence through their connection. "You saved my life yesterday," he said without turning. "We go on. If you die, I die," she replied simply. Self-preservation. He turned then, a faint smile touching his lips. A practical answer. "Did you expect gratitude for sparing me from execution only to bind me to you forever?" His smile faded. "I did not choose this bond any more than you did. And yet here we are." She gestured between them. "Enemies made allies by magic we don't understand. Are we enemies?" He studied her carefully. "You were condemned as a traitor, yet you warned of the rogue attack and saved my life from an assassin's arrow. These are not the actions of an enemy. I told you I was innocent. Many claim innocence when facing judgment." He moved away from the window, circling her slowly. "The question remains, who are you really? Morgan of no family, a simple Omega from the outer villages, or something more?" She touched the mark on her neck, now hidden beneath the high collar of her new clothes. "I am what fate has made me, as are you." He nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps we can agree on that much." He returned to his desk, retrieving a document sealed with the royal crest. "I have rescinded your death sentence, officially. The public story will be that new evidence exonerated you. Your true connection to me will remain known only to the council and my most trusted guards. And what am I to do now? Am I a prisoner still, or something else? You are my bondmate, according to Victoria. What that means beyond our shared mortality remains to be seen." He handed her the document. "For now, you will remain in the palace, where I can ensure your safety. You will be given appropriate quarters and treated with respect, befitting your new status." "On what of the council? General Marcus seemed eager to see me dead, bond or no bond." The king's expression hardened. "Marcus follows my orders, whatever his personal feelings might be." A knock at the door interrupted them. The king called for the visitor to enter. A tall man with graying hair and a weathered face stepped into the room. Despite his age, he moved with the fluid grace of a lifelong warrior. Unlike the younger guards, he wore no ceremonial armor, only practical leathers marked with the royal insignia. A long scar ran from his temple to his jaw, testament to battles long past. "Gabriel," the king acknowledged with a nod, "come meet our new guest." The older man approached, his keen eyes evaluating Morgan with professional detachment rather than the contempt she had come to expect. "This is Captain Gabriel, commander of my personal guard, and the only man in Silvercrest I trust without reservation," the king explained. "He will oversee your security and begin your training." "Training?" Morgan echoed. "If you are to survive in the palace, you must learn to defend yourself," Gabriel said, his voice deep and rough like stone on stone. "Enemies of the crown will target you now." "I don't know how to fight," she admitted. Gabriel's expression softened slightly. "Neither did I once, but necessity is a thorough teacher." The king moved to a cabinet and withdrew a slim dagger in a leather sheath. He offered it to Morgan, hilt first. "Consider this your first lesson," he said. "Ever be unarmed in a place where others might wish you harm." She took the weapon hesitantly. It felt foreign in her hand, its weight unfamiliar. "Tomorrow at dawn," Gabriel said, "we begin your instruction. Rest well tonight. You'll need your strength." As he turned to leave, the king called after him, "And Gabriel, assign Lyra to her personal detail. A female guard might make our guest more comfortable." Gabriel nodded and departed, leaving Morgan alone once more with the king. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could keep me locked away, alive, but contained." King Alaric's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she glimpsed something beneath his regal mask. Uncertainty, perhaps, or a weariness that his position never allowed him to show. "Because the goddess has bound us together for a purpose," he said finally. "And until I understand what that purpose is, I will not waste the potential of our connection." He gestured toward the door. "Go now. Rest and prepare. The life you knew ended in that courtyard yesterday. What comes next is unwritten, even by fate." As Morgan left the king's study, the weight of the dagger at her hip reminded her of his words. Never be unarmed in a place where others might wish you harm. The Palace of Silvercrest, for all its grandeur, was precisely such a place. She followed a guard back to her new quarters, larger and more comfortable than the tower room, but still essentially a cage, albeit a gilded one. As the door closed behind her, she withdrew the silver pendant Victoria had returned to her, studying its familiar curves in the afternoon light. If she truly was of moonstone blood, what did that mean for her future? And what secrets lay in her forgotten past that might threaten the king to whom her life was now inextricably bound? The morning brought no answers, only the beginning of a new chapter in a story Morgan had never asked to be part of. Dawn came too soon, golden light spilling through the windows of her chamber. Morgan had barely slept, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. The mark on her neck had pulsed throughout the night, sometimes warming, sometimes cooling, as though it responded to thoughts she could not consciously access. A knock at her door heralded the arrival of Captain Gabriel, punctual as promised. He entered without ceremony, accompanied by a woman whose appearance immediately commanded Morgan's attention. She was tall for a female wolf, with dark skin and closely cropped hair that accentuated the sharp angles of her face. A thin scar bisected one eyebrow, giving her a perpetually questioning expression. She wore the uniform of the Royal Guard, but with modifications that spoke of practicality over tradition. Most striking were her eyes, amber and alert, missing nothing. "This is Lyra," Gabriel introduced her. "She will be your personal guard and training partner." Lyra inclined her head slightly, neither a bow nor a nod of equals. "My lady." The title caught Morgan off guard. "I'm not a lady." "You are now," Gabriel corrected. "By the king's decree, you have been given the rank of royal ward. It affords you certain privileges and protections." "And responsibilities," Lyra added, her voice surprisingly melodic for someone with such a warrior's bearing. "Which begin with learning to survive." They escorted Morgan to a private training yard enclosed by high walls that blocked curious eyes. The space was simple, a packed earth floor surrounded by racks of training, weapons, and basic obstacles. The king was already there, dressed in plain clothes rather than his royal finery, speaking with Thaddeus in hushed tones. Both men looked up as the trio entered. "Leave us," the king commanded his advisor. Thaddeus departed with a bow, casting a suspicious glance at Morgan as he passed. "He doesn't trust me," Morgan observed once the advisor was gone. "Thaddeus doesn't trust anyone," the king replied. "It's why he's lived so long in royal service." He turned to Gabriel. "Begin with the basics. I want to observe her natural abilities before we proceed further." What followed was the most physically demanding morning of Morgan's life. Gabriel and Lyra put her through a series of tests, evaluating her strength, speed, and instincts. They discovered quickly that, while she lacked formal training, she possessed the quick reflexes and spatial awareness common to those who had survived life in the harsh outer villages. "She moves well," Lyra commented to Gabriel after Morgan had completed a particularly challenging obstacle course. "Naturally balanced." "Balance can be taught," Gabriel countered, "but instinct cannot. Let's see how she responds to threat." Without warning, he tossed a wooden practice sword to Morgan. She caught it clumsily as Lyra advanced on her with another training blade. "Defend yourself," Gabriel ordered. Lyra didn't hesitate, launching into a series of controlled but aggressive strikes. Morgan backpedaled, barely managing to block the first few blows before one caught her across the ribs, sending her stumbling to one knee. From his position observing, King Alaric flinched slightly, his hand moving unconsciously to his own side where Morgan had been struck. "Interesting," Gabriel murmured, noting the reaction. Lyra offered Morgan a hand up. "Again," she said not unkindly. "This time, don't just react. Anticipate." They continued for another hour, with Morgan gradually improving under Lyra's patient guidance. By the end, she was bruised and exhausted, but had managed to land a single counterstrike, that had earned a nod of approval from Gabriel. Enough for today, the captain decided. Water and rest, then we'll discuss strategy. As Morgan caught her breath, the king approached. He had watched the entire session in silence, his expression unreadable. You learn quickly, he observed. Necessity, she replied, echoing Gabriel's words from the day before. Indeed, he studied her with those obsidian eyes. The council will meet again tonight. Your presence is required. Why? They've already seen the mark. There are matters to discuss regarding your heritage and what it means for Silvercrest. He hesitated, then added, Victoria has been researching the Moonstone lineage. She believes she may have found a connection to your mother. Morgan's heart skipped a beat. What did she find? She will explain tonight. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The bond between us. Can you feel it when I'm wounded? Yes, she admitted. When Lyra struck me, did you feel it too? He nodded. A phantom pain, but present nonetheless. We should be careful what we share through this connection. It could be used against us. With that cryptic warning, he departed, leaving Morgan to wonder what other aspects of their lives might bleed across the mysterious bond that linked them. The afternoon brought more lessons, though of a different sort. Gabriel introduced Morgan to the basics of palace protocol and the complex hierarchy of the royal court. Lyra taught her simple defensive maneuvers that might save her life if attacked in close quarters. Both of them treated her with a professional courtesy that, while not warm, was remarkably free of the contempt she had come to expect from those of higher rank. Why are you helping me? She asked Lyra during a brief rest. Yesterday I was condemned as a traitor. Lyra shrugged. I follow the captain's orders. He follows the king's. If the king says you're to be trained, we train you. Is it that simple, Marcio? Rarely, Lyra admitted with the ghost of a smile. But loyalty is simpler than most believe. I pledged mine to the captain and the king long ago. Where they lead, I follow without question. Even when the path leads to befriending a former enemy? Lyra's amber eyes fixed on Morgan with sudden intensity. Are you our enemy? No, Morgan answered honestly. I never was. Then there's nothing to forgive. Lyra picked up her practice blade again. Now show me that counter I taught you. As twilight approached, Morgan was escorted back to her chambers to prepare for the council meeting. She found new clothes laid out for her, finer than anything she had ever worn. A deep blue tunic embroidered with silver thread, black leggings of supple leather, and soft boots that fit perfectly. The color and style were carefully chosen, she realized, to display the glowing mark on her neck to best advantage while maintaining the dignity expected of someone in the king's circle. She dressed carefully, conscious of how different she appeared from the ragged Omega who had knelt in the courtyard just 2 days earlier. The dagger the king had given her hung at her hip, its weight becoming more familiar with each passing hour. A knock at the door announced the arrival of her escort. Gabriel waited outside, more formally dressed than she had seen him before. It's time, he said simply. As they walked the torch-lit corridors toward the council chamber, Morgan felt the mark on her neck warming, pulsing in rhythm with her quickening heartbeat. Whatever revelations awaited her in that room would forever change the course of her life, she was certain. For better or worse, the journey that had begun on the execution pyre was carrying her toward a destiny she could neither predict nor escape. The council chamber differed from the throne room in both size and purpose. Where the throne room was designed to impress with its grandeur, the council chamber was built for privacy and candid discussion. A round table of ancient oak dominated the space, carved with the history of Silvercrest in concentric rings. 7 chairs surrounded it, one slightly larger than the others, bearing the royal crest. King Alaric already sat in this chair when Morgan entered, flanked by the 3 council members she had met the previous day. Victoria stood slightly apart, near a small altar where incense burned in honor of the goddess Selene. The scent of lavender and moonflower filled the air, creating an atmosphere of sacred solemnity. Come forward, the king commanded. Morgan approached the table, acutely aware that no chair awaited her. She was not a council member, merely the subject of their deliberation. The mark remains strong, Victoria observed, gesturing to the silver glow visible at Morgan's neck. Indeed, the king acknowledged. Now tell us what you've discovered. Victoria moved to the table, unrolling an ancient scroll with careful hands. The parchment was yellowed with age. its edges crumbling despite obvious attempts at preservation. The Moonstone Chronicles, she explained for Morgan's benefit, the recorded history of your maternal line, dating back 12 generations. Her pale eyes lifted to Morgan's face. Your mother was Illyria, daughter of Selene's chosen, last true seer of the Moonstone bloodline before the great betrayal. The name struck Morgan like a physical blow. Lyria. Her mother had a name, a history, a place in the world beyond the fragments of memory Morgan had carried all these years. That's impossible, General Marcus interrupted. The last of the Moonstone seers died in the purge. So we were meant to believe, Victoria countered, but some escaped, Illyria among them. She fled to the outer villages, changed her name, and lived as a common Omega, hiding her true nature and powers. If this is true, Thaddeus said slowly, then the girl is not just any Omega. She carries royal blood, albeit from a disgraced line. A line wrongfully disgraced, Victoria corrected sharply. The Moonstones were framed for their supposed betrayal. This statement caused an immediate uproar. General Marcus pounded the table with his fist, face flushing with anger. High Priestess Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her throat in shock. Only Thaddeus remained outwardly calm, though his eyes narrowed dangerously. You speak treason, Victoria, the general growled. I speak truth, long buried, she replied without fear, as is my duty as seer. King Alaric raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. What proof do you have of this claim? Victoria gestured to Morgan. Her very existence is proof. The goddess would not bestow the moon bond upon a traitor's child. The mark is a sign of Selene's favor, a restoration of balance that was lost when the Moonstones were driven out. Or it could be the goddess's way of controlling a dangerous bloodline, Thaddeus suggested. Binding her to the king ensures she cannot move against the crown. Morgan found her voice at last. I have no desire to move against anyone. Until 2 days ago, I didn't even know of this heritage. Which brings us to the question of your mother, Victoria said gently. Do you remember her death? Morgan shook her head. Barely. I was young, perhaps 5 or 6. There was sickness in the village that winter. Many died. Not sickness, Victoria said. Poison, deliberate, targeting any who might have Moonstone blood, hidden among the refugees from the war. This revelation sent a chill through Morgan. Who would do such a thing? The same ones who framed your ancestors for treason, Victoria replied, her gaze sliding meaningfully toward General Marcus. The general surged to his feet. You accuse me? Not you personally, Victoria clarified, but your predecessor, General Corvus. He feared the power of the Moonstone Seers, their ability to communicate directly with the goddess. Such power threatened his control over the previous king. These are serious accusations, King Alaric said, his voice measured. If true, they suggest a conspiracy that has shaped our kingdom for generations. They are more than accusations, Victoria said. They are history, written in blood and magic. She turned to Morgan. Show them the pendant. Morgan hesitated, then withdrew the silver crescent from beneath her tunic. It caught the light, glimmering with an inner radiance that seemed to answer the glow of her mark. The Moonstone Key, Victoria identified it, passed from mother to daughter for countless generations. It opens something far more valuable than any physical lock. What does it open? Morgan asked. The Lunar Codex, a repository of knowledge kept hidden within the Temple of Selene. Knowledge that would exonerate your family and reveal the true architects of the Great Betrayal. General Marcus scoffed. Convenient that this evidence has remained hidden for so long. Hidden but not destroyed, Victoria countered. I have spent decades searching for the truth. The goddess rewards patience. Throughout this exchange, King Alaric had remained thoughtful, his eyes moving between the arguing council members and Morgan's face. Now he spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. Whatever the historical truth may be, we face a present reality. The moon bond exists. Morgan carries Moonstone blood. These facts cannot be dismissed, regardless of our feelings about them. He rose from his chair, commanding the room's attention. I propose the following course. Morgan will remain under royal protection while we investigate these claims. Victoria will continue her research into the Codex. If evidence exonerating the Moonstone line is found, appropriate reparations will be considered. And if the evidence confirms their guilt, General Marcus challenged, then justice has already been served, the king replied coldly. But I will not condemn an innocent for the sins of ancestors, real or imagined. His gaze fell on Morgan, evaluating her with those obsidian eyes that seemed to see far more than she wished to reveal. From this day forward, you will be known as Morgan Moonstone, Royal Ward of Silvercrest. You will continue your training with Captain Gabriel and Lyra. You will learn our ways, our history, and your place within it. It wasn't a request or even an offer. It was a command, spoken with the full authority of an alpha king accustomed to unquestioning obedience. Before Morgan could respond, a commotion outside the chamber interrupted the proceedings. The door burst open and a palace guard rushed in, his face pale with urgency. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty," he panted. "There's been an attempt on Lady Eleanor's life. Poison in her evening wine." All eyes turned to the high priestess, who sat frozen in shock. "I haven't taken my evening meal yet," she whispered. "If you hadn't warned me—" "Who discovered this?" the king demanded. "One of the kitchen staff, Your Majesty." The cupbearer tasted the wine, as is custom, and collapsed immediately. "The healers are with him now, but his condition is grave." General Marcus was on his feet instantly. "The palace must be locked down. No one enters or leaves until we find the culprit." The king nodded in agreement. "See to it, General." He turned to Thaddeus. "Double the guard on all council members. This may be just the beginning." As the room erupted into action, Morgan felt a strange sensation through the bond, a mixture of anger and concern flowing from the king. His eyes met hers briefly across the chaos, and in that moment she understood that his worry extended to her as well. If someone sought to eliminate the council, the mysterious girl bound to the king would be a natural target. The attack on Eleanor proved what Morgan had suspected from the beginning. The Palace of Silvercrest was a place of shadows and secrets, where enemies might lurk behind any smile. The dagger at her hip now seemed woefully inadequate against such insidious threats. As Gabriel appeared at her side to escort her back to her chambers, she touched the moonstone pendant at her throat, drawing comfort from this tangible link to a mother she barely remembered. Whatever dangers lay ahead, she would face them with the quiet strength that had allowed her to serve as an outcast all these years. The true test had only just begun. Morgan sat alone in her chambers as the palace lockdown continued into the night. Guards patrolled the corridors outside, their footsteps marking the passage of hours. Through her window, she could see additional sentries on the walls, torches creating pools of light in the darkness. The attempted assassination had changed everything. What had been political maneuvering was now deadly serious. Someone within the palace walls wanted the council members dead, and Morgan could not help but wonder if her arrival had triggered this bold move. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She approached the door cautiously, one hand on the dagger the king had given her. "Who is it?" she called. "Lyra, came the reply vaguely. "I bring news and orders." Morgan opened the door to find the female guard looking grim. She entered quickly, checking the room with practiced efficiency before speaking. "The cupbearer is dead," she reported. "The poison was swift and unknown to our healers. High Priestess Eleanor remains under heavy guard." "Have they found who did it?" "Not yet, but suspicion falls on the kitchen staff. Several are being questioned." Morgan frowned. "It seems too obvious. If I wanted to poison a council member, I wouldn't use someone who could be easily traced back to me." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "You've given this thought?" "I've spent my life watching people, learning how to predict their actions. It was necessary for survival in the outer villages." Morgan paced the room restlessly. "This feels wrong." "The king shares your suspicion," Lyra revealed, "which is why he sent me with these orders. You're to be moved to a secure location known only to him, Captain Gabriel, and myself." "Now, in the middle of the night?" Lyra nodded. "When the palace is most distracted by the investigation. We leave in 10 minutes. Bring only what you can carry quietly." As Morgan gathered her few possessions, including the precious pendant, she felt the mark on her neck warming. The bond seemed more active in moments of stress or danger, as though it sought to prepare her for what lay ahead. "Where are we going?" she asked as they slipped into the corridor. "The old keep," Lyra whispered. A fortified section of the palace dating back to the earliest kings. Few remember it exists, and fewer still know how to access it. They moved silently through the palace, avoiding the main passages where guards might question their movement despite Lyra's authority. Instead, they used servants' corridors and hidden passages that spoke of Lyra's intimate knowledge of the palace's secrets. How do you know these ways? Morgan asked as they descended a narrow staircase hidden behind a tapestry. I grew up in the palace, Lyra answered. My mother served the previous queen. These passages were my playground before they became my advantage as a guard. They emerged into a part of the palace Morgan had never seen, where the architecture was noticeably older. The stone here was rougher, the ceilings lower, speaking of a time before the grandeur of the current royal residence. Lyra led her to a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. She produced a key from a chain around her neck and unlocked it, revealing a surprisingly comfortable chamber beyond. A fire already burned in a small hearth, casting warm light over a bed, table, and chairs. Provisions had been laid out, suggesting this safe house had been prepared in advance. The king will join you shortly, Lyra informed her. I'll stand guard outside. No one will pass without the proper password. Left alone once more, Morgan explored the chamber. Unlike the tower room or even her more recent quarters, this space felt lived in, personal. Books lined a small shelf, their spines worn from handling. A chess set was arranged on a side table, a game apparently in progress. A sword rack held blades of various sizes and designs, all meticulously maintained. These are the king's private quarters, a voice said from behind her. Morgan turned to find King Alaric entering through a concealed door different from the one she and Lyra had used. He had changed from his formal council attire to simpler clothes, though the royal signet ring still adorned his hand. I thought kings lived in opulent chambers, she said, gesturing to the modest surroundings. They do, for appearances. He closed the hidden door behind him. But this is where I come when I need to think clearly, away from the performance of kingship. He moved to the fire, warming his hands. The assassination attempt was sophisticated. The poison used is rare, found only in the far northern territories beyond our borders. Rogue territory, Morgan said. He nodded. Precisely, which suggests either collaboration with rogues or someone wanting us to believe such a connection exists. Like the scent allegedly found at the rogue camp that condemned me, she observed. His eyes sharpened. Yes, the pattern is similar. He gestured for her to sit as he took a chair opposite. I believe the same hand may be behind both events. Someone who wants me dead and now targets the council as well. She frowned in concentration. Who benefits if the council falls? Many could benefit from chaos, the king replied, but few have the access, knowledge, and resources to attempt it. Morgan's thoughts turned to the council members themselves. General Barkes with his obvious distrust of her and the Moonstone line. Thaddeus with his calculating gaze and political cunning. Even High Priestess Eleanor, whose apparent victim status could be a clever misdirection. You suspect someone close to you, she said, reading his expression. I must suspect everyone, he corrected. A king without suspicion is soon a king without a throne or a head. Is that why I'm here? To keep me close where you can watch me? A faint smile touched his lips. Partly, but also because if someone seeks to harm you to get to me, this is the most defensible position in the entire palace. No one enters this section without my knowledge. He rose and moved to a cabinet, withdrawing a bottle and 2 glasses. Wine, I assure you it's not poisoned. How can I be sure? In answer, he poured 2 glasses and drank from one immediately. Our bond would ensure mutual destruction if I sought to harm you, he reminded her. An effective deterrent, wouldn't you agree? She accepted the second glass cautiously. The wine was rich and warm, nothing like the rough spirits she had occasionally tasted in the outer villages. It spread heat through her chest, easing some of the tension that had built throughout the day. Tomorrow your training intensifies, the king informed her. Not just physical combat, but politics, history, and the customs of court. If you are truly of Moonstone blood, you must learn to carry that heritage with the dignity it deserves. Even though that heritage is considered treasonous by many? Especially because of that, he said. You will face scrutiny and challenge at every turn. You must be prepared to meet it with strength and wisdom. Why help me this way, she asked, voicing the question that had troubled her since their fates became entwined. You could keep me alive, but hidden, acknowledged only as necessary for your survival. The king studied her for a long moment, his obsidian eyes reflecting firelight. Because I have ruled long enough to recognize when the goddess has a purpose. The moon bond is rare, appearing only in times of great change or danger. I would be a fool to ignore its significance. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Tell me something, Morgan Moonstone. In all your life as an outcast, did you never wonder why you survived when others didn't? Why fate seemed to spare you time and again? The question struck deep, touching on thoughts she had rarely allowed herself to explore. There had been moments throughout her hard life when death seemed certain, yet something always intervened, some unlikely twist of circumstance or unexpected strength within herself. I assumed it was luck, she admitted, or perhaps simple stubbornness. There is no such thing as luck in a world watched by goddesses, the king said softly. You survived because you were meant to reach this point, to stand where you stand now. The certainty in his voice was unsettling. It suggested a design to her suffering, a purpose to her pain that she wasn't sure she wanted to accept. And what is this point? What am I meant to do now that I've reached it? That, he said, is what we must discover together. The fire crackled between them, casting their shadows large against the ancient stone walls. Outside, the palace continued its frantic search for an assassin who might strike again at any moment. Within this hidden sanctuary, king and former condemned sat facing each other across a divide of rank and history that seemed both vast and, suddenly, inexplicably narrow. The bond pulsed between them, a silver thread connecting their fates in ways neither yet fully understood. Whatever destiny awaited them would be faced together, whether they wished it or not. As the night deepened around the old keep, Morgan realized that the execution pyre had indeed marked an ending, but not the one intended by her accusers. What had ended was not her life, but her isolation, her anonymity, her belief that she was insignificant in the grand tapestry of Silvercrest's history. The truth, it seemed, was far more dangerous and far more wondrous than she had ever imagined. Dawn broke through narrow windows in the old keep, painting the ancient stones with golden light. Morgan woke instantly, a habit formed through years of survival in the outer villages. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory returned. The execution that never happened. The moon bond. The king. The attempted assassination. She sat up, finding a fresh set of clothes laid out at the foot of the bed. Practical garments in the royal colors, designed for movement and training rather than court appearances. A note rested atop them in elegant script. Begin at sunrise. The courtyard below. Come prepared for pain. No signature, but she recognized Lyra's direct manner in the words. The hidden courtyard was accessible only through the old keep, surrounded by high walls covered in ancient ivy. Unlike the manicured royal gardens, this space was designed for purpose rather than beauty. Training dummies lined one wall, their stuffed bodies worn from countless strikes. Racks of wooden practice weapons stood beneath a weathered overhang. The ground was packed earth, scattered with sand to absorb blood and sweat. Lyra waited in the center, already moving through a series of fluid combat forms that made violence seem like artistry. Captain Gabriel stood watching, his weathered face impassive as Morgan approached. You're late, he noted without rancor. The sun has barely cleared the walls, Morgan protested. Sunrise began 20 minutes ago, Lyra corrected, never pausing in her deadly dance. An enemy won't wait for you to be fully awake before striking. Morgan suspected the lesson had already begun. Time itself was different here in the palace, measured with military precision rather than the natural rhythms she had known in the outer villages. Where is the king, she asked, glancing around the empty courtyard. Attending to matters of state, Gabriel replied. The assassination attempt has the entire council on alert. Your safety has been entrusted to us for now. He tossed her a wooden practice sword, heavier than the one she had used the day before. You relied on speed yesterday. Today we test your strength. What followed was brutality disguised as instruction. Gabriel pushed her beyond what she believed her body could endure. Lyra demonstrated techniques with efficient precision, then forced Morgan to repeat them until her muscles screamed and her lungs burned. When she faltered, Gabriel's voice cut through her exhaustion. The bond protects you from death, not pain, he reminded her. In battle, pain is the difference between victory and capture. By midday, Morgan could barely stand. Sweat soaked her clothes, and fresh bruises bloomed across her arms and legs. Yet beneath the exhaustion, she felt something new stirring, a sense of her body's potential, of strength previously untapped. Enough physical training, Gabriel decided, tossing her a cloth to wipe her face. The mind needs exercise as well as the body. They moved to a shaded corner of the courtyard where a small table had been set with water, fruit, and bread. As Morgan gratefully hydrated herself, Victoria peered through a hidden door in the wall, carrying an armful of ancient texts. "I see Captain Gabriel has been thorough in his instruction," the elderly seer observed, noting Morgan's disheveled state. "Good. A strong body will help you channel the bond's energy." She placed the books on the table, opening the topmost volume to a page marked with a silk ribbon. The text was written in an archaic script that Morgan couldn't decipher, but intricate illustrations depicted two figures connected by silver light emanating from identical marks on their necks. "The moon bond has appeared only 7 times in recorded history," Victoria explained. "Always in periods of great upheaval, always between those of royal bloodlines." "I am no royal," Morgan said automatically. Victoria's pale eyes fixed on her with that unnerving directness. "Your mother was Illyria of House Moonstone, direct descendant of Queen Lunara, who ruled alongside King Alaric's ancestor 3 centuries ago. The royal blood in your veins is as ancient as his, though circumstances have hidden it. If that's true, why did she live as an Omega in the outer villages? Why raise me in poverty if we had royal blood?" "Because she was hunted," Victoria said simply. "The purge did not end with the great betrayal. Those who escaped lived in constant fear of discovery." The seer turned the page to reveal a detailed map of Silvercrest and the surrounding territories. The Moonstone line was charged with treason for allegedly collaborating with rogue pacts during the border wars. The evidence was fabricated by those who feared the Moonstone's influence over the throne, but the accusation was enough to turn public opinion against them. Morgan studied the map, recognizing the small village where she had grown up, situated near the contested northern border. "My mother never spoke of any of this." "To protect you," Victoria confirmed. "Knowledge can be as dangerous as a blade to a child." Gabriel, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "The king believes that whoever tried to poison High Priestess Eleanor may be connected to those who falsely accused you of treason." "The same enemy striking from the shadows," Lyra added, her amber eyes alert. "But who stands to gain from eliminating both a council member and framing a moonstone?" The question hung unanswered as Victoria opened another book, this one containing illustrations of the moon in various phases. "Now we must focus on training you to control the bond. It flows both ways, Morgan. The king feels your pain as you feel his, but the connection can be managed, even directed with practice." Morgan touched the mark on her neck, which had settled into a steady, faint glow beneath her skin. "How do I control something I don't understand?" "You begin by understanding its nature," Victoria replied. "The moon bond links life forces. It can share strength as well as weakness. In times of greatest need, one bondmate can draw upon the other's vitality." "Draw upon how?" Morgan asked. "Through will and intent." Victoria placed a small silver bowl on the table, filling it with water from a flask. "Look into the water and focus on the mark. Feel its energy, then direct that energy outward, toward a specific purpose." Morgan stared skeptically at the bowl but followed the instructions. At first, nothing happened. Then, as she concentrated on the warm pulse at her neck, the water in the bowl began to shimmer with faint silver light, mirroring the glow of her mark. "Good," Victoria approved. "The bond responds to your awareness. With practice, you will learn to channel it precisely." They continued with these exercises throughout the afternoon, Victoria patiently guiding Morgan through various techniques for focusing the bond's energy. By evening, Morgan could make the water glow consistently and had even managed to direct the energy toward healing a small cut on her hand, watching in amazement as the wound closed before her eyes. "Remember," Victoria cautioned, "what you take, you must eventually return. The bond seeks balance above all." As twilight descended over the old keep, Lara appeared with fresh clothing and news from the palace. The king requests your presence for the evening meal, in his private dining room, not the main hall. The king's private dining room proved to be another chamber within the old keep, smaller and more intimate than Morgan had expected. A table set for two occupied the center of the room, illuminated by candles that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Maps and battle plans were rolled up and set aside on a sideboard, suggesting the space normally served as a strategy room rather than a dining area. King Alaric was already seated when Morgan entered, his crown absent, his formal attire replaced by simpler, though still regal, clothing. He rose at her arrival, a courtesy she had not anticipated. "Morgan Moonstone," he greeted her. "Victoria informs me you've made progress with the bond today." "Some," she admitted, "though it still feels foreign to me, like wielding a weapon I've never trained with." An apt comparison. He gestured for her to take the seat opposite his. Any power without proper training can become a danger to oneself as much as to one's enemies. Servants appeared, bearing platters of food that made Morgan's mouth water after the day's exertions. Roasted meats seasoned with herbs, fresh bread still steaming from the ovens, vegetables harvested from the royal gardens, and wine from the king's personal stores. It was more abundance than she had seen in her entire life in the outer villages. "Eat," the king encouraged, noting her hesitation. "You've earned it. Gabriel reports that you show promise in combat training." "He has an unusual way of showing approval," Morgan remarked, thinking of the bruises hidden beneath her sleeves. The ghost of a smile touched the king's lips. "Gabriel believes pain is the most effective teacher, a philosophy formed in battle rather than in council chambers." They ate in silence for several minutes, the king watching her with that calculating gaze that seemed to measure every reaction. Finally, he spoke again, his tone more personal than she had yet heard from him. "The night of the assassination attempt, you asked why I am helping you. Instead of merely keeping you alive for my own survival, I gave you an answer about the goddess's purpose, which is true, but incomplete." Morgan paused, setting down her goblet. "What's the complete answer?" "I knew your mother." The simple statement struck her like a physical blow. "What?" "Not well," he clarified, "and not as king. I was still prince then, serving in the border patrols as all royal heirs must. There was a skirmish with rogues near your village. I was wounded, separated from my unit. Your mother found me, tended my wounds, and hid me from the rogues until my soldiers could locate me." Morgan stared at him in disbelief. "She never mentioned this." "She wouldn't have. It would have been dangerous for both of you." He touched a spot on his side, just below his ribs. "She saved my life. I never learned her name, but I never forgot her face when I saw you in that courtyard. I recognized her in you, but couldn't place the memory until the mark appeared." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I needed to be certain." His eyes met hers directly. "The resemblance could have been coincidence, but Victoria's research confirms what I suspected. The woman who saved me was Illyria Moonstone, in hiding from those who had destroyed her family." Morgan's mind raced with implications. "Did she know who you were?" "I believe so, though she never said. She treated me not as royalty, but simply as a wounded wolf in need of aid." His expression softened slightly at the memory. "It's one reason I questioned the accusations against you from the beginning. The daughter of such a woman seemed unlikely to betray her pack." The revelation cast everything in a new light. The king's interest in her training, his protection, his willingness to consider the rehabilitation of the Moonstone name, it all stemmed from a debt he felt he owed her mother. "Is that why the bond formed between us?" she asked. "Because of this connection?" "Victoria believes the goddess chooses connections with purpose. Perhaps this is part of it." He rose, moving to a cabinet from which he retrieved a small wooden box. "I had planned to give you this once your training was more advanced, but perhaps now is the right time." He placed the box before her. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay a silver dagger. Unlike the practical weapon he had given her previously, this was a ceremonial blade, its hilt inlaid with moonstones that caught and reflected the candlelight. The Moonstone family crest was engraved on the blade, matching the pendant she wore. "This belonged to your ancestors," the king explained. It was kept in the royal treasury after the purge, preserved despite calls to melt it down. Morgan lifted the dagger carefully, feeling its perfect balance. How did you know it was there? I make it my business to know everything within my walls, he replied. Even artifacts others would prefer I forget. The gift represented more than a weapon. It was acknowledgement of her heritage, a tangible connection to the family she had never known. Thank you, she said simply, unable to express the deeper emotions the gesture evoked. Before the king could respond, the door burst open. Captain Gabriel entered, his expression grim, all protocol forgotten in urgency. Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty. There's been another attack. Lord Thaddeus has been found dead in his chambers. The king was on his feet instantly. Assassinated? No, my lord. The royal physician believes he took his own life. A letter was found beside him, confessing responsibility for the attempt on High Priestess Eleanor. Morgan felt the surge of the king's emotions through their bond, a mixture of shock, anger, and suspicion so powerful it made her gasp. You don't believe it, she said, reading his reaction. Thaddeus was many things, but he was not a man to take his own life, the king confirmed. This confession is too convenient. The council is gathering now, Gabriel reported. General Marcus is already claiming this proves the conspiracy has been rooted out. The king's eyes narrowed. Does he indeed? He turned to Morgan. Return to your quarters and remain there under guard. This situation has become even more dangerous than I feared. As he strode from the room, Morgan called after him. What aren't you telling me? He paused at the doorway, his profile sharp in the candlelight. Thaddeus was investigating your mother's death. He believed it wasn't sickness that killed her, but a very specific poison. The same poison used in the attempt on Eleanor. With that revelation hanging in the air, he departed, leaving Morgan to process its implications. Someone had murdered her mother years ago. The same enemy now moved against the council and had silenced Thaddeus just as he neared the truth. The moonstone dagger felt suddenly heavier in her hand, its purpose clearer than before. This was no longer just about survival or even vindication. It was about justice long denied, for her mother and for herself. Lyra appeared in the doorway, alert and ready. We need to move you. The old keep may be compromised if Thaddeus was killed. As they hurried through the shadowed quarters, Morgan gripped the ceremonial dagger, its moonstones glowing faintly in response to the mark on her neck. Something was awakening within her, some dormant inheritance of the moonstone blood. She only hoped she would learn to wield it in time to face whatever enemy now hunted her. The following days passed in a haze of intensity. Morgan was relocated to a new secure chamber, this one hidden within the Temple of Selene itself, where High Priestess Eleanor could personally ensure her safety. The temple occupied the highest tower in the palace complex, its windows capturing moonlight from dusk till dawn, channeling it through crystal prisms that bathed the circular chamber in silver radiance. Here, Morgan's training took on a new dimension. Victoria focused less on combat and more on the spiritual aspects of the moon bond. Hours were spent in meditation, learning to sense the king's presence through their connection even when physically separated. Other exercises taught her to shield her emotions from flowing across the bond, a necessary skill for maintaining privacy of thought. The bond can become a constant distraction if not properly managed, Victoria explained one morning as they sat cross-legged on moonstone tiles. You must learn to open and close the connection at will, like a door in your mind. Morgan closed her eyes, concentrating on the warm pulse at her neck. She had discovered that visualizing the bond as a silver thread helped her manipulate its flow. In her mind, she imagined drawing the thread inward, containing its energy within the mark itself, rather than allowing it to stretch between herself and the king. The sensation of his presence faded gradually, like a voice becoming distant. When she opened her eyes, Victoria was nodding in approval. Good. You're learning control faster than expected. The moonstone blood gives you natural affinity for such work. Have you learned anything more about my mother or the moonstone history? Morgan asked. In the chaos following Thaddeus's death, her questions about her heritage had been set aside. Victoria's expression grew somber. Some. With Thaddeus gone, I've taken up his research. Your mother was not just any moonstone, but the last direct descendant of the main branch. Had history been different, she might have served as the king's primary advisor, as moonstones did for generations. Instead, she died in poverty, poisoned for a blood crime she never committed, Morgan said bitterly. Her death may have had more immediate cause than old hatreds, Victoria countered. I believe she was killed because she knew something, something that threatened powerful people even decades after the purge. What could she have known that was worth killing for after all that time? The location of the Lunar Codex, Victoria replied, the sacred text containing the true history of the Great Betrayal. Before Morgan could press for more details, the chamber door opened, admitting High Priestess Eleanor. Unlike the austere Victoria, Eleanor embodied the more ceremonial aspects of Celine's worship. Her silver robes were embroidered with phases of the moon in metallic thread, and her gray hair was arranged in elaborate braids crowned with a diadem of moonstones. The king approaches, she announced. He brings news from the border. King Alaric entered moments later, his expression grave. He wore light armor beneath his royal cloak, suggesting he had come directly from the War Council. Rogue packs have been sighted within our territory, he informed them without preamble. 3 villages along the northern border have been attacked. Morgan felt her heart contract. Which villages? Riverstone, Blackwood, and Willow Glen. She exhaled in relief. Not her home village then, though Riverstone was close enough to cause concern for people she had known. The pattern of attack is unusual, the king continued, unrolling a map across a table. They strike with precision, targeting specific buildings rather than raiding indiscriminately as rogues typically do. What kind of buildings? Victoria asked, studying the marked locations. The village archives in Riverstone, the elder's home in Blackwood, and in Willow Glen, a small shrine to Celine that contained historical records. Victoria and Eleanor exchanged meaningful glances. They're searching for something, the high priestess said. The Codex, Morgan suggested, remembering their earlier conversation. Possibly, Victoria agreed, though the Codex would never be kept in such obvious locations. The king's sharp gaze moved between them. What is this Codex, and why would rogues risk entering our territory to find it? Not rogues alone, Victoria said carefully. Someone directs them, someone who knows what to look for. Someone within Silvercrest, Morgan added, the pieces falling into place. The same person behind the attacks on the council. The king nodded grimly. My thoughts exactly, which is why I've come to a decision. He turned to Morgan directly. You will accompany me to the border. The statement surprised everyone in the room. Eleanor immediately protested. My king, she is still learning to control the bond. To take her into potential danger is precisely what our enemy would not expect, the king finished for her. They believe she remains hidden in the palace, a target they cannot reach. By removing her, we disrupt their plans and potentially draw them into the open. And if there is fighting, Victoria asked, the bond puts you both at risk. Morgan's training has progressed well, according to your reports, the king countered, and she knows the border villages better than any of my advisors. Her knowledge could prove invaluable. Morgan recognized the pragmatism behind his decision. She was both asset and liability, and he had calculated that her value as the former outweighed the risk of the latter. When do we leave? She asked, accepting the inevitable. Dawn tomorrow, a small force only to maintain speed and secrecy. Captain Gabriel, Lyra, and a dozen of my most trusted guards will accompany us. His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. Pack for hard travel. The borderlands are not the palace. Morgan almost smiled at that. I lived 20 years without palace comforts, Your Majesty. The borderlands are more home to me than these walls. Something like approval flickered across his features before he departed to continue preparations. When he was gone, Victoria approached Morgan, her expression troubled. There is something you should know before you leave, the seer said quietly. The bond between you grows stronger with proximity and shared purpose. You may find emotions bleeding across it that are unexpected. What kind of emotions? Victoria's ancient eyes held wisdom accumulated over decades of observing human nature. The kind that complicate duty with feeling. Be wary of them, Morgan Moonstone. In times of danger, clear heads must prevail. The warning left Morgan unsettled as she prepared for the journey. She had already noticed subtle changes in the bond, moments when the king's thoughts seemed almost accessible to her, impressions rather than words. If Victoria was right, this expedition would only intensify such connections. Dawn found them assembled in the palace courtyard, a small company mounted on the finest horses in the royal stable. Morgan had been provided with riding clothes of supple leather, practical, yet bearing the subtle markers of royal association. The moonstone dagger hung at her hip, and her mother's pendant rested against her skin beneath her tunic. King Alaric appeared last, dressed not in royal finery, but in the armor of a border commander. Only the signet ring on his hand and the authority in his bearing identified him as sovereign. He mounted a massive black stallion, its coat gleaming like polished onyx in the early light. "We ride north," he announced. "No banners, no heralds. We are Border Patrol, nothing more." "Understood?" The guards acknowledged the command with practiced efficiency. Gabriel positioned himself at the king's right, while Lyra rode beside Morgan. As they passed through the palace gates, Morgan felt a strange mixture of apprehension and exhilaration. For the first time since the execution that never happened, she would see the open sky of the borderlands again. They maintained a punishing pace throughout the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By nightfall, they had left the cultivated lands surrounding the capital and entered the wilder territory that marked the beginning of the border regions. They made camp in a defensible clearing, setting watches in rotation. Morgan found herself unable to sleep despite the day's exhaustion. The familiar sounds and smells of the wilderness awakened memories of her life before the palace, both good and painful. She rose silently, moving to the edge of the camp where she could gaze up at the waxing moon, its light casting silver patterns through the leaves. "You should be resting," a voice said from behind her. She turned to find the king approaching, his silhouette distinctive even in darkness. "So should you," she replied. "Kings learn to function with little sleep." He came to stand beside her, following her gaze to the moon. "Does being back in the borderlands stir memories?" "Many," she admitted, "not all pleasant." "Tell me about your village," he said unexpectedly, not as king to subject, but as one who wishes to understand. The request surprised her, but as they stood beneath the same moon that had witnessed her childhood, Morgan found herself speaking of things she rarely shared. The struggle of daily life as an omega in a hierarchical society. The small kindnesses that sustained her after her mother's death. The forest where she had learned to hunt, to hide, to survive. The hierarchy was different in the outer villages, she explained, less rigid than in the capital. Necessity forced cooperation across rank. An omega who could hunt was more valued than an alpha who couldn't. Yet you were still outcast enough to be easily accused of treason, the king observed. Hierarchy bends under pressure but never breaks, she agreed. When the rogues began raiding more frequently, fear tightened the old structures. Alphas reasserted dominance, omegas were watched with suspicion. And you, where did you fit in this tightening order? Morgan hesitated, then decided on honesty. Nowhere. After my mother died, I lived on the edges. I hunted alone, traded for what I needed, spoke only when necessary. A solitary wolf, the king mused. Unusual for our kind. Unusual but not unknown. Some of us find peace in solitude. And now, he asked, gesturing to the camp where his guards slept, do you find peace in this new pack I've forced upon you? The question carried more weight than its casual delivery suggested. Morgan considered her answer carefully. I find purpose, she said finally. Peace may come later or never, but purpose is enough for now. He nodded, accepting her response without pressing further. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, the bond between them humming quietly, transmitting not specific thoughts, but a general sense of mutual understanding. We should both rest, the king said eventually. Tomorrow we reach Riverstone, the first village the rogues attacked. As they turned back toward the camp, Morgan felt a sudden sharp pain in her temple, so intense it made her stumble. Through the bond, she sensed immediate danger, though she could see no threat. Get down, she cried, lunging toward the king. Her warning came barely in time. An arrow whistled through the space where he had stood a moment before, embedding itself in a tree with a solid thunk. Ambush! The king shouted, drawing his sword. The camp erupted into action. Guards scrambled to defensive positions as dark shapes emerged from the surrounding forest. Rogues moving with the coordinated precision that had characterized the village attacks. Morgan drew the moonstone dagger, its blade glinting with unnatural brightness in the moonlight. The mark on her neck burned hot, responding to the surge of adrenaline. A rogue charged her, teeth bared in a snarl. She sidestepped, her training with Lyra guiding her movements. The dagger found its mark in the attacker's shoulder, drawing a howl of pain. She kicked him back, creating space to assess the larger battle. The king fought with controlled fury, his sword describing lethal arcs that kept three rogues at bay. Gabriel and the royal guards had formed a protective circle, but more attackers emerged from the trees with each passing moment. "They knew we were coming," Lyra shouted, dispatching a rogue with brutal efficiency. "This was a trap!" Morgan realized with sudden clarity that the border expedition had been compromised before it began. Someone within the palace had betrayed their plans, someone with access to the king's decisions. A scream of pain cut through the chaos. One of the royal guards fell, a rogue's blade buried in his chest. The king moved to defend the fallen man, but the action exposed his flank. Another rogue seized the opportunity, lunging with a dagger aimed at the king's unprotected back. Morgan felt the attack through the bond before she saw it. Without conscious thought, she channeled energy through the mark, visualizing the silver thread between them pulling taut. Time seemed to slow as she moved, covering ground with impossible speed to place herself between the king and the assassin's blade. The dagger intended for the king plunged into her shoulder instead. Pain exploded through her, doubled as it reflected across the bond. The king staggered, feeling her wound as his own, but remained standing. Morgan collapsed to one knee, blood flowing between her fingers as she clutched the wound. The rogue assassin, startled by her intervention, hesitated just long enough for the king to turn and dispatch him with a single powerful stroke. "Morgan!" Lyra was at her side in an instant, pressing a cloth against the wound to stem the bleeding. "I'm fine," Morgan gasped, though the pain suggested otherwise. "Protect the king." Through the bond, she felt the king's concern warring with his tactical assessment of the battle. The rogues had them outnumbered, and more could be waiting in the forest. "Fall back!" he commanded. "Defensive formation, retreat to the ridge." The guards responded immediately, forming a tight circle around their wounded as they began a fighting withdrawal toward higher ground. Morgan tried to stand but found her strength failing. The wound was deeper than she had first thought, and blood loss was making her dizzy. Strong arms lifted her. Gabriel had sheathed his sword to carry her, trusting the other guards to cover him. "Foolish girl," he muttered, but there was respect beneath the gruffness. Brave, but foolish. As they retreated into the darkness, Morgan caught a final glimpse of the king. He fought at the rear guard, holding off pursuers to allow the others to reach safety. Despite the distance growing between them, the bond remained strong, transmitting his determination in something else, something that might have been admiration. Then consciousness slipped away, and she fell into darkness deeper than the forest night. Morgan woke to pain and firelight. She lay on a bedroll beneath an outcropping of rock, sheltered from the wind that whispered through pine branches overhead. Her shoulder had been bandaged, the wound cleaned and treated with herbs whose bitter scent hung in the air around her. "Welcome back," Lyra said, appearing at her side with a water skin. "Drink slowly." Morgan accepted the water gratefully, her throat parched. "The others?" "Two dead, 3 wounded, but we reached the ridge safely. The rogues withdrew before dawn." Lyra helped her sit up against the rock wall. "The king wants to see you once you're awake." How long was I unconscious? "Most of the night and half the day. The blade was poisoned, but nothing Victoria's antidotes couldn't counter." The information sent a chill through Morgan. Not a random attack then, but another assassination attempt. This one targeting the king directly. She touched her bandaged shoulder, feeling the dull throb of healing tissue beneath the dressing. "I'll fetch the king," Lyra said, rising smoothly to her feet. "He's been concerned." King Alaric appeared moments later, his armor bearing fresh scratches from the night's battle. He dismissed the nearby guards with a gesture, ensuring their privacy before kneeling beside Morgan's bedroll. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've witnessed in battle," he said without preamble. "Possibly both." "I acted on instinct," she replied. "The bond warned me." "Yes, I felt it too. A moment of perfect clarity, as though time itself slowed." He studied her face with unusual intensity. "Victoria said the bond could share strength, But she didn't mention it could coordinate our actions so precisely. Morgan remembered the surge of energy she had channeled through the mark. I think it responds to need. The greater the danger, the stronger the connection. The king nodded thoughtfully. A useful tactical advantage if we can learn to control it reliably. His expression softened slightly. You saved my life, Morgan Moonstone. That debt will not be forgotten. Consider it repayment for sparing mine in the courtyard, she suggested, uncomfortable with his gratitude. A faint smile touched his lips. A fair exchange. He became serious again. The attack confirms what we suspected. Someone within the palace betrayed our plans. Someone with access to my war council. General Marcus, Morgan said immediately, giving voice to the suspicion that had been growing since Thaddeus's death. He is the obvious suspect, the king agreed, perhaps too obvious. Marcus has never hidden his disdain for the Moonstone line or his opposition to your presence. A true conspirator might be more careful to conceal such feelings. Then who? I have my suspicions, but no proof yet. He rose, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at the phantom pain he shared through their bond. Rest today. We move at dusk toward Riverstone. I want to investigate the village attacks myself, and we're less than half a day's journey now. As he turned to leave, Morgan called after him. The rogues weren't acting like rogues, were they? Their attack was too coordinated, too precise. The king paused, looking back over his shoulder. No, they weren't. Whoever leads them has military training. Another piece of the puzzle that points to someone within my own command structure. The implications hung in the air between them. If a high-ranking military commander was coordinating with rogue packs, the threat to Silvercrest was far greater than a simple border dispute. It suggested a conspiracy that had festered for years, perhaps decades. Reaching back to the time of the Great Betrayal itself, Morgan spent the remainder of the day resting and rebuilding her strength. The poison had been neutralized, but its effects lingered in a bone-deep weariness that made even small movements exhausting. By evening, however, she felt strong enough to continue the journey. Their reduced company set out as twilight descended, moving cautiously through the forested hills. Instead of traveling directly to Riverstone, they circled wide, approaching from an unexpected direction to avoid any potential ambush. The village came into view shortly before midnight, a cluster of stone and timber buildings nestled in a valley beside a swift-flowing river. Unlike the bustling community Morgan remembered from trading visits in her youth, Riverstone now stood eerily quiet. No smoke rose from chimneys, no torches illuminated doorways. It's abandoned, Gabriel observed as they halted on a ridge overlooking the settlement. The survivors must have fled to larger villages after the attack. Or there were no survivors, Lyra added grimly. They entered cautiously, weapons ready, spreading out to search the silent buildings. Morgan accompanied the king to the village archive, the specific target of the rogue raid according to reports. The small stone building stood apart from the others, its doors splintered from forced entry, its interior ransacked. They were thorough, the king noted, examining shelves emptied of scrolls and records. Whatever they sought, they either found it or destroyed it in the search. Morgan moved deeper into the archive, drawn to a back room that had served as the archivist's private study. Unlike the main chamber, this room showed less obvious damage. Books and scrolls lay scattered but not destroyed, suggesting a more careful search. A particular shelf caught her attention, not for what it contained, but for what surrounded it. Scorch marks blackened the stone wall, and the wooden floor beneath bore gouges as though something had been forcibly removed. "Your Majesty," she called. "Look at this." The king joined her, crouching to examine the damaged floor. Something was mounted here, he observed, something the raiders wanted badly enough to tear from the wall. Morgan ran her fingers over the scorch marks. These aren't from ordinary fire. She felt a faint resonance with the mark on her neck, a subtle vibration that suggested magical energy had been discharged here. Moonfire, the king identified it. A protective spell used to guard sacred objects. Only those of certain bloodlines can handle items warded this way. Moonstone bloodlines, Morgan guessed. Among others, yes. The royal line also carries the resistance, though few besides the king and his direct heirs know this. He traced the outline where something had been mounted on the wall. Circular, about the size of a dinner plate. A medallion, perhaps, Or a small shield? Morgan closed her eyes, trying to recall if her mother had ever mentioned such an object. A memory surfaced, faint but persistent, of her mother telling bedtime stories about a mirror that showed the truth of any person who gazed into it. The lunar mirror, she said suddenly. It could be part of the Codex Victoria mentioned. My mother spoke of it in stories, a mirror that reveals truth hidden by deception. The king's expression sharpened with interest. Such an artifact would be invaluable in identifying traitors. If it exists, and if our enemy has obtained it, they could use it to identify anyone working against them, Morgan finished. Or worse, they could destroy it to prevent the truth of the great betrayal from ever coming to light. A shout from outside interrupted their speculation. They emerged from the archive to find Lyra running toward them, her expression urgent. Riders approaching from the north, she reported, a large company, moving fast. Rogues, the king asked. No, your majesty. They fly Silver Crest colors. It's General Marcus with the Royal Vanguard. The king's expression darkened. I gave no orders for the Vanguard to follow us. Perhaps the council sent reinforcements after the ambush, Gabriel suggested, joining them. Perhaps, the king agreed, though his tone suggested doubt. Or perhaps our enemy makes his move at last. He turned to Morgan, speaking quickly and quietly. Whatever happens next, trust only what you feel through the bond. Words can deceive, but the connection between us cannot lie. The warning sent a chill down Morgan's spine, but she nodded her understanding. The bond had already saved both their lives once. If confrontation came, it might be their only reliable advantage. General Marcus arrived with the thunder of hooves and the glint of armor under moonlight. 50 royal guards accompanied him, their expressions solemn as they surrounded the king's smaller company. The general himself dismounted with military precision, approaching the king with a formal salute that could not quite disguise the triumph in his eyes. Your Majesty, he greeted, voice carrying to all present. The council sent me to ensure your safety after reports of the ambush reached the capital. Thoughtful of them, the king replied neutrally, though I wonder how news traveled so quickly and how you found us so easily when we deliberately avoided the main roads. Marcus smiled thinly. Efficiency is my reputation, my king. When matters of royal security are concerned, I leave nothing to chance. And what of Lady Eleanor and Victoria? Do they remain in good health at the palace? Something flickered in the general's eyes at the question. The palace is secure, your majesty, but after recent events, the council felt it prudent to place certain individuals under protective custody. Imprisonment, you mean? Morgan said, unable to remain silent. You've seized control while the king is absent. Marcus's gaze shifted to her, cold with undisguised contempt. The moonstone speaks out of turn, as usual. This is a matter of state security, not a concern for traitors' offspring. Careful, General, the king warned, his voice deceptively soft. You address a royal ward under my personal protection. And you, my king, may soon require protection yourself. Marcus gestured, and his guards moved subtly into offensive positions. The council has received disturbing evidence regarding your judgment since forming this unnatural bond. So the confrontation had come at last. Morgan felt the mark on her neck warming as the bond activated in response to the threat. Through it, she sensed the king's calculations, his assessment of their disadvantageous position, and his determination to find a path through the danger that now surrounded them. What evidence? The king demanded, playing for time as he signaled Gabriel with the barest tilt of his head. Evidence that the moon bond has compromised your ability to rule objectively, Marcus replied. You risk the safety of Silvercrest by allowing this moonstone to influence you, just as her ancestors influenced yours to near destruction. The moonstones never betrayed the crown, Morgan countered. That lie was created by your predecessor, General Corvus, to eliminate a bloodline he feared. Marcus laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Is that what Victoria has been filling your head with? Conspiracy theories to rehabilitate traitors? Not theories, the king said quietly. Truth, which you have worked very hard to keep buried. Truth about your own family's role in the Great Betrayal. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Marcus's composure cracked, revealing fury beneath. My family has served the crown faithfully for generations. Your grandfather served himself, the king corrected. He engineered the false evidence against the moonstones because their loyalty was to the crown, not to him. When they discovered his collaboration with the rogue Pax, he eliminated them before they could expose him. Lies, Marcus snarled, abandoning all pretense of respect. The moonstones were the traitors, not my family. Then why did you kill Thaddeus when he uncovered proof? Morgan asked. Why poison High Priestess Eleanor when she supported investigating the great betrayal? The general's hand moved to his sword. Enough of this. By authority of the council, I am relieving you of command, my king, pending an investigation into your fitness to rule under the influence of this corrupted bond. The royal guards tensed, awaiting the order to seize their sovereign. The king stood unnaturally still, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. But through the bond, Morgan felt his intent with perfect clarity. As Marcus drew breath to give the command, the king's voice cut through the night with unexpected power. I invoke the right of challenge. The ancient declaration froze every wolf present. The right of challenge was seldom used but universally recognized, a tradition older than the kingdom itself. It allowed a ruler to answer accusations with combat rather than politics, warrior against warrior rather than faction against faction. Marcus paled visibly. You cannot be serious. I am king, Alaric replied. I can and do invoke this right. You question my fitness to rule, my judgment, my bond with Morgan Moonstone. Face me in combat, General, and let the goddess judge the truth of your accusations. The challenge placed Marcus in an impossible position. To refuse would be to admit cowardice before his own men. To accept meant facing the king in single combat, a prospect few would welcome. The king's skill with a blade was legendary, his victories in border skirmishes the foundation of his early reputation. You seek to avoid justice through ancient custom, Marcus protested weakly. I seek to reveal truth through honorable means, the king countered. Unless you fear that truth, General. The trap was perfectly laid. Any hesitation now would confirm guilt in the eyes of the watching guards. Marcus realized this, his expression hardening into resignation. I accept your challenge, he said stiffly. Dawn tomorrow, in the village square. Dawn it is, the king agreed. Until then, both our forces will maintain distance. Captain Gabriel will represent my interests in establishing the combat ground. With negotiations complete, the two companies separated, each establishing camp on opposite sides of the abandoned village. As guards set watches and prepared defenses, Morgan followed the king to a small cottage that would serve as their headquarters for the night. You knew this would happen, she accused once they were alone. You anticipated Marcus would follow us. I suspected, the king corrected. When Thaddeus died, it became clear that someone was eliminating those who sought the truth about the great betrayal. Marcus's family has the most to lose if that truth emerges. But to risk everything on single combat, Morgan shook her head in disbelief. He could have simply arrested you, claimed emergency powers. He could have tried, the king agreed with a grim smile. But such a move would divide the royal guards. Many remain personally loyal to me, even among his vanguard. By invoking the challenge, I give him a path that preserves his honor while removing the need for civil war. And if you lose? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. If the king fell in combat, Morgan would die as well through their bond. The stakes could not be higher for either of them. I won't lose, he said simply. Too much depends on our survival. The truth of the Powdle, the future of Silvercrest, the vindication of your bloodline, all hang in the balance of tomorrow's combat. Morgan touched the mark on her back, feeling its steady pulse. The bond will be with you, she promised. Whatever strength I can provide will be yours to command. The king's expression softened slightly. You've already given more than could be asked, taking a poisoned blade meant for me. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. If we survive tomorrow, Morgan Moonstone, much will change in Silvercrest. The truth your mother died protecting will finally come to light. And what happens to me then? She asked, voicing the question that had lingered since the bond first formed. When my purpose is fulfilled, what becomes of the Omega who was almost executed? The king regarded her thoughtfully. That depends on what you want. The bond may be a goddess's decree, but your future beyond it remains your choice to make. It was the first time anyone had suggested she might have choices, might determine her own path once the immediate crisis passed. The possibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. I haven't thought beyond survival, she admitted. Perhaps it's time to begin, he suggested. Dawn comes quickly, and with it, destiny. As the king turned to prepare for the coming combat, Morgan gazed out the cottage window at the moon rising above the abandoned village. Tomorrow would decide not just their immediate fate, but the course of Silvercrest's future. The truth of the great betrayal, buried for generations, stood on the verge of revelation. And somewhere beyond this confrontation lay possibilities she had never dared to imagine. A future where the name Moonstone might once again be spoken with honor rather than contempt. The bond pulsed steadily at her throat, a silent reminder that whatever came with the dawn, she would not face it alone. Dawn painted the abandoned village of Riverstone in shades of gold and shadow. Morgan stood at the edge of the makeshift arena, a circle cleared in the village square where fate would soon be decided. The night had passed too quickly, filled with preparation and quiet strategy. Now, as the first rays of sunlight touched the eastern horizon, the moment of truth approached. Across the square, General Marcus appeared with his entourage. He wore ceremonial combat armor, polished to gleaming perfection, the insignia of his rank prominently displayed. His sword, longer than standard issue, had been a gift from the previous king, a symbol of status as much as a weapon. His face betrayed nothing, set in the stern mask of a military commander preparing for duty. King Alaric emerged from the cottage where they had spent the night. Unlike Marcus, he wore simple battle armor, practical rather than ceremonial. His sword was the one he carried on border patrols, its hilt worn smooth from use, its blade marked with the evidence of previous conflicts. He looked not like a king preparing for ritual combat, but a warrior approaching battle with clear purpose. The bond between them hummed with energy, responding to the tension of the moment. Morgan could feel the king's calm focus, his mind already moving through the patterns of combat to come. Through the connection, she tried to project strength and certainty, though her own heart raced with fear she dared not show. Captain Gabriel approached, his weathered face solemn as he recited the ancient laws that govern such contests. By right of challenge, established in the founding days of Silvercrest, disputed matters of succession and rule may be settled through sacred combat. The goddess Selene bears witness to this trial, her judgment manifest in victory or defeat. He turned to face the assembled guards from both companies. This challenge has been properly invoked by King Alaric and accepted by General Marcus. The victor's authority shall be recognized by all present under pain of exile. The formalities established, Gabriel withdrew to the edge of the circle where Morgan and Lyra stood watching. "The king seems calm," Lyra observed quietly. "He is," Morgan confirmed, feeling the steady pulse of the bond between them. More than calm, focused, like a hunter who has finally cornered elusive prey. Gabriel nodded grimly. "Marcus may have the advantage of youth, but the king has experience few can match, and motivation beyond mere ambition." The combatants approached the center of the circle. Traditional protocol required them to speak before engaging, final words that would be remembered regardless of outcome. "General Marcus," the king addressed his opponent formally, "before we begin, I offer you one chance to speak truth and avoid this conflict. Confess your family's role in the great betrayal, admit your actions against the council, and justice can be found through means other than bloodshed." Marcus's face flushed with anger. "There is nothing to confess, my king, except concern for a ruler whose judgment has been compromised by unnatural bonds. I fight today to protect Silvercrest from the influence of traitors' blood." "So be it," the king replied. "May the goddess judge what is true." They saluted with raised swords, then stepped back to take their positions. For a moment, perfect stillness held the square in its grip. Then, with explosive force, Marcus attacked. His first strikes came in a flurry of controlled aggression, blade flashing in the morning light as he pressed forward with the confidence of a younger wolf against an aging king. Alaric met each blow with precision rather than matching strength, his movements economical, defensive rather than aggressive. "He's testing the king's reflexes," Gabriel murmured, watching the exchange with a tactician's eye, looking for weaknesses. And finding none, Lear added, as the king sidestepped a powerful thrust, using Marcus's momentum against him. The clash of steel echoed through the empty village as the duel intensified. Marcus fought with textbook precision, his technique flawless, each movement following established military doctrine. The king fought differently, his style adapted from countless border skirmishes where survival mattered more than form. Through the bond, Morgan sensed the king's strategy. He was letting Marcus expend energy on aggressive maneuvers while conserving his own strength, waiting for the inevitable moment when overconfidence would create an opening. It was the patience of experience against the vigor of ambition. Minutes stretched as they circled, engaged, separated. Sweat began to glisten on Marcus's brow. His attacks, initially measured, grew more forceful, driven by frustration at his inability to penetrate the king's defense. Alaric remained composed, his breathing controlled, his movements fluid despite the intensity of combat. Then came the moment the king had anticipated. Marcus, seeking to end the stalemate, committed fully to a powerful diagonal strike. It was perfectly executed, a killing blow if it landed. But the king had read the intention through subtle shifts in posture. Instead of parrying directly, he pivoted, allowing the blade to pass within inches of his chest. As Marcus's momentum carried him forward, off balance for just a fraction of a second, Alaric countered. His sword found the gap between shoulder plates in Marcus's ornate armor, drawing first blood. The general stumbled, momentarily shocked by the pain, but recovered quickly, spinning to face his opponent with renewed caution. "First blood to the king," Gabriel announced formally. By tradition, the duel could end here if both parties agreed. The first wounding traditionally allowed for reconciliation without death. Marcus, however, showed no inclination to yield. His eyes had darkened with a dangerous intensity, pride wounded along with flesh. "Impressive, my king," he acknowledged coldly. "But a scratch proves nothing except luck." "Not luck, General," the king replied. "Patience, a virtue you might have cultivated had ambition not consumed you." The verbal jab struck as effectively as the physical one. Marcus attacked again, his technique now compromised by emotion. What had been disciplined aggression became something raw, more desperate. The change should have worked to the king's advantage, but it also made Marcus unpredictable. His strikes coming from unexpected angles with brutal force. One such blow caught the king by surprise, slipping past his guard to slice along his ribs. Morgan gasped, feeling phantom pain bloom across her own side as the bond transmitted the injury. The king maintained his composure despite the wound, but Marcus had seen the reaction, his eyes narrowing as they flicked between Monarch and bonded Omega. "So it's true," he said, a cruel smile forming. "What hurts the king hurts the girl." An interesting weakness to exploit. He pressed his attack with renewed purpose, no longer fighting merely to defeat the king, but to inflict maximum pain, knowing each injury would be doubled through the bond. It was a brutal strategy that showed the true nature of the man beneath the veneer of loyal general. Morgan clutched the mark on her neck, feeling it pulse with increasing warmth. Through their connection, she sensed the king's determination not to yield despite the pain, his focus narrowing to the essential patterns of combat. Without conscious decision, she began channeling energy through the bond, just as Victoria had taught her. Not taking from him this time, but giving, sending strength to supplement his own. The effect was subtle but immediate. The king's movements, which had begun to show the strain of combat and injury, regained their fluid precision. His counterstrikes came with renewed power, forcing Marcus back step by step. The general's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to the first hints of fear. He had expected the aging king to weaken, not to find new reserves of strength. His attacks grew wilder, abandoning technique for brute force. The king waited, defended, and then, when opportunity presented itself, executed a move of such perfect timing that it seemed almost inevitable in retrospect. Marcus overextended on a thrust aimed at the king's heart. Alaric deflected the blade with his own, stepped inside the general's guard, and delivered a precise strike to the vulnerable gap beneath the arm. The sword penetrated deeply, finding vital areas protected by neither armor nor bone. Marcus made a sound of surprise more than pain, his own blade falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. He stared at the king with wide, disbelieving eyes. How? He gasped, blood beginning to stain his polished armor. Truth finds its way to light eventually, General, the king replied, withdrawing his blade with a single smooth motion. As does justice. Marcus fell to his knees, one hand pressed futilely against the mortal wound. You don't understand, he said, his voice weakening. What I did was necessary. The Moonstones would have destroyed everything with their power over the throne. The only destruction came from your family's fear of losing influence, the king countered. Generations of lies to cover one original betrayal. Blood flecked Marcus's lips as he struggled to speak. The mirror shows truth, but truth is dangerous. Some secrets must remain buried for the good of all. The lunar mirror, Morgan said, stepping forward, despite Gabriel's attempt to hold her back. Where is it? What did you do with it? Marcus's eyes found hers, hatred mingling with something like resignation. Hidden where only blood can find it, he whispered. Then with a final shuddering breath, he collapsed. The general's death brought no celebration. The guards from both companies stood in respectful silence as Captain Gabriel formally pronounced the challenge complete and the king's authority reaffirmed. Arrangements were made to transport Marcus's body back to the capital, where it would receive the honors due his rank despite the circumstances of his fall. Morgan approached the king as a healer tended his wounds. The cut along his ribs was serious but not life-threatening. Through their mind, she could feel his physical pain mingled with a deeper weariness that had nothing to do with combat. He revealed something at the end, she said quietly, about the lunar mirror being hidden where only blood can find it. What did he mean? The king winced as the healer applied a poultice to his wound. I suspect he meant it's hidden somewhere that requires Moonstone blood to access. Your blood specifically as the last of your line. But where? The raids targeted village archives and elder homes, nothing suggesting a place only I could find. Unless, the king's expression sharpened with sudden realization. Your home village. We assumed it was spared because the raiders hadn't reached it yet. What if they avoided it because they knew they couldn't access what was hidden there? The possibility resonated with intuitive certainty. My mother's cottage, Morgan said. If she knew the truth about the great betrayal, if she had evidence hidden somewhere, then Marcus would have needed you to find it, the king finished. He couldn't kill you without losing access to whatever your mother concealed. The realization cast recent events in a new light. Morgan had been condemned to execution, yet somehow Victoria had appeared at the crucial moment, ensuring the bond manifested to save her life. Had the seer known more than she revealed? Had she been guiding events from the shadows all along? We need to go to my village, Morgan decided, now before Marcus's allies can move against us. The king nodded in agreement, issuing orders for immediate departure. Leaving a small detachment to escort Marcus's body back to the capital, they set out within the hour, riding hard toward the northeastern border, where Morgan's village lay nestled in the shadow of the Moonfall Mountains. They traveled without rest, pushing their mounts to the limits of endurance. The king's wound clearly pained him, transmitted as a dull ache across the bond, but he refused to slow their pace. By nightfall, they crested a familiar ridge, and Morgan saw the scatter of lights that marked her home village of Wolfhaven. Unlike Riverstone, Wolfhaven showed signs of normal life continuing. Smoke rose from chimneys, and a few villagers moved between cottages on evening errands. Their arrival caused immediate stir, the unexpected appearance of armed riders led by the king himself, bringing villagers into the central square. Morgan felt strange returning as a royal ward after leaving as a condemned traitor. Familiar faces stared in confusion and whispered behind hands as she rode beside the king. None approached directly, the presence of royal guards creating a barrier of formality and fear. Your mother's cottage, the king prompted quietly. Where is it? The northern edge, she replied, already guiding her horse in that direction. Beyond the elders' hall, near the tree line. The cottage stood as she remembered it, though more weathered from seasons of neglect. After her mother's death, no one had claimed the modest dwelling, its association with an alleged traitor, making it effectively taboo in village society. Nature had begun to reclaim it, ivy climbing the stone walls, wildflowers pushing through cracks in the path that led to the door. Morgan dismounted, feeling a complex mixture of emotions as she approached the place where she had spent her childhood. Grief for her mother, bitter memories of isolation after her death, and now a strange sense of coming full circle, returning to find truth buried in the past. The door creaked open at her touch, revealing an interior left largely untouched since her departure. Dust covered the simple furniture. A table still held a clay cup and plate, as though her mother might return any moment to use them. The hearth stood cold, spider webs stretching across the stone where fire had once burned. "What are we looking for?" the king asked, following her inside. "I don't know exactly," Morgan admitted. "Something that would require my blood to access. Something my mother would have hidden from everyone, even me." They began a careful search of the cottage, checking floorboards for loose panels, walls for hollow spaces, furniture for hidden compartments. The king's guards secured the perimeter while Captain Gabriel and Lyra assisted inside, their experienced eyes catching details civilians might miss. It was Lyra who discovered the first clue. "This hearthstone," she said, kneeling by the fireplace. "It's set differently than the others." Morgan joined her, examining the stone in question. It appeared ordinary, covered in the same soot and dust as its neighbors, but when she pressed palm against it, she felt a faint vibration respond to her touch. The sensation was similar to what she had experienced with the moonstone dagger, a resonance with her blood. "This is it," she confirmed, "but how do we open it?" The answer came through memory rather than reason. Her mother's bedtime stories, so long dismissed as mere fantasy, now revealed their hidden purpose. "The flame knows truth, and truth cannot burn," she recited. She always said that before starting a fire in the hearth. Understanding dawned. "We need fire," the king said, "and your blood." They quickly gathered kindling from around the cottage, building a fire in the long cold hearth. As flames began to catch and grow, Morgan drew the ceremonial moonstone dagger the king had given her. Its blade gleamed in the firelight, seeming almost eager for what came next. With steady hands, she drew the edge across her palm, opening a shallow cut from which blood welled immediately. She allowed several drops to fall onto the suspicious hearthstone, then pressed her bleeding hand firmly against it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as her blood seeped into seemingly solid stone, a soft glow began to emanate from beneath her palm. The light spread, tracing patterns invisible until now, revealing an intricate crescent moon surrounded by ancient script. The stone shifted beneath her touch, sliding sideways to reveal a small cavity beneath. Within lay an object wrapped in faded silver cloth. Morgan lifted it carefully, unwrapping layers of protective fabric to reveal a disc of polished silver about the size of a dinner plate, its surface so perfectly smooth it seemed to capture and amplify the firelight. "The lunar mirror," the king identified it, his voice hushed with awe. The artifact was both simpler and more beautiful than Morgan had imagined. No ornate frames surrounded it, no decorative elements distracted from its pure purpose. Just polished silver, crafted with a perfection that spoke of skills long lost to modern metalsmiths. "How does it work?" she asked, holding it reverently. "According to legend, it shows the true nature of anyone reflected in its surface," the king explained. "No deception can withstand its gaze. It was used in ancient times to judge disputes and identify traitors, which is why Marcus's grandfather wanted it destroyed," Morgan realized. "It would have revealed his collaboration with rogues immediately." The king nodded. "But he couldn't destroy something so powerfully enchanted. The best he could do was hide it where no one would think to look, in the home of a disgraced moonstone who had fled to the outer villages." "My mother knew," Morgan said, understanding flowing through her like a river finding its true course. "She knew what it was, kept it safe all those years. That's why they killed her when they learned she had survived the purge." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shifting light across the lunar mirror's surface. As Morgan angled it slightly, the reflection changed, no longer showing the cottage interior, but something else entirely. A temple of white stone, columns rising toward a domed ceiling open to the sky. A place she had never seen yet somehow recognized. "The Temple of Selene," the king identified it, looking over her shoulder at the image. "The sacred heart of the palace, where High Priestess Eleanor conducts the most important ceremonies." "Why is it showing us this place?" Morgan wondered. As if in answer, the image shifted again, revealing Victoria standing within the temple, surrounded by robed figures. She appeared to be performing some ritual, her hands raised toward the moon visible through the open dome. Her lips moved in what seemed to be urgent prayer or invocation. "Something's happening at the palace," the king said, alarm sharpening his voice. Victoria wouldn't conduct major rituals without council approval unless circumstances were dire. The bond between them pulsed with sudden intensity, the mark on Morgan's neck flaring with silver light that matched the glow now emanating from the mirror. Through their connection, she felt the king's sudden concern, his tactical mind already calculating the fastest route back to the capital. "We need to return immediately," he decided. "Whatever Victoria has foreseen, it requires our presence." And they carefully rewrapped the lunar mirror, Morgan securing it within a leather satchel that she wore crossbody. As they prepared to depart, a village elder approached, overcome by curiosity despite obvious fear. "Your Majesty," the old man said, bowing deeply, "we had no warning of your visit. If we have offended in some way—" "You have not," the king assured him. "We came seeking answers, not to assign blame. Tell me, elder, do you remember the woman who lived in this cottage?" Illyria was her true name, though she may have used another. The elder's eyes widened at the mention of the name. "I remember her, yes. A gentle soul, skilled with herbs and healing. We mourned when illness took her, despite the rumors that followed." "She was no traitor," the king stated firmly, "nor is her daughter." He gestured toward Morgan. "The truth of the great betrayal has been uncovered. The Moonstone name will be restored to honor in Silvercrest, and this village will be rewarded for sheltering them, however unknowingly." The pronouncement left the elder speechless, his gaze moving between king and former outcast with bewilderment. Morgan felt a complex satisfaction at the moment, not vindictive but healing. Her mother's memory would be cleansed of false accusations, her sacrifice recognized at last. They rode through the night, changing horses at military outposts along the way to maintain their pace. The bond between Morgan and the king seemed to strengthen with each mile, the shared purpose of their return creating a harmony of intention that flowed between them like an underground river. Near dawn, they crested the final hill that overlooked the capital city of Silvercrest. What they saw brought them to an abrupt halt. The palace at the city's heart was surrounded by an unnatural silver glow that pulsed with rhythmic intensity. Beams of moonlight, impossibly bright despite the approaching sunrise, converged on the temple of Selene, creating a pillar of radiance that stretched from earth to sky. "The goddess intervenes," the king said, his voice hushed with awe and concern. "Victoria must have called upon her directly." "Why would she do that?" Morgan asked, the mark on her neck burning in response to the distant power. "Only in times of greatest need would a seer risk such direct communion," he replied. The last recorded instance was during the Great Betrayal itself, when the previous high priestess attempted to reveal the truth before she was silenced. They urged their tired mounts forward, entering the city through gates standing mysteriously unguarded. The streets were empty, citizens either fled or sheltering indoors from the supernatural display centered on the palace. Palace guards they encountered seemed dazed, acknowledging the king's presence with mechanical salutes, but offering no explanation for the strange events unfolding. In the main courtyard, they found their first answers. High Priestess Eleanor awaited them, her silver robes gleaming in the unearthly light, her expression grave but determined. "You have returned just in time, my king," she greeted them. "Victoria foresaw your victory over Marcus, but warned that a greater threat now emerges. The goddess herself demands resolution to the ancient wrong that has unbalanced Silvercrest for generations." "What wrong?" the king asked. "The false accusation against the Moonstones? We have found evidence to correct that injustice." He gestured toward the satchel containing the lunar mirror. Eleanor shook her head. The betrayal was merely a symptom of a deeper imbalance. The true wrong was the perversion of the sacred hierarchy established by Selene. Morgan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the pre-dawn air. "The Alpha-Omega system," she said, understanding dawning. "It wasn't meant to be a tool of oppression." "No," Eleanor confirmed. "It was designed as a circle of balance, each role essential and honored. Over centuries, ambition twisted it into a ladder of dominance. This distortion has weakened our connection to the goddess, making us vulnerable to corruption from within and enemies from without." "Where is Victoria now?" the king asked, looking toward the temple where moonlight continued to pool with unnatural brilliance. "In communion with Selene. She believes the moon bond between you was no accident, but the goddess's design to restore proper balance. Eleanor's gaze moved to Morgan, softening with something like compassion. But such restoration requires sacrifice. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Morgan touched the mark on her neck, feeling its heat increase at the mention of sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? She asked, though some part of her already knew the answer. One life freely given at the sacred altar during the moment of perfect balance between moon and sun, Eleanor replied. Dawn is approaching. Victoria awaits you both in the temple. They followed Eleanor through the palace, empty corridors echoing with their footsteps. Guards stood at attention but seemed unable to perceive them fully, as though the approaching ritual had already begun to separate participants from ordinary reality. The Temple of Selene occupied the highest point of the palace complex, its white marble columns visible from throughout the city. Inside, the central chamber opened to the sky through a perfect circular aperture. The floor beneath mirrored this opening with a pool of still water that reflected the moon above. Around this pool stood an altar of pure white stone, ancient symbols carved into its surface. Victoria waited beside the altar, looking more frail than Morgan remembered, yet somehow more powerful, her eyes shining with the same silver light that filled the temple. You found it, she said as they entered, her gaze fixing on Morgan's satchel. The lunar mirror, the final piece needed to complete the restoration. Morgan removed the wrapped artifact, placing it on the altar as Victoria indicated. The seer unwrapped it with reverent hands, positioning it at the altar's center, where moonlight struck it directly. The silver surface came alive with light, reflecting not the physical reality around them, but something deeper, a realm of pure energy and intent. The goddess speaks through the mirror now, Victoria explained, her voice taking on the quality of formal ritual. She shows us what must be done to heal the wounds of centuries. All in the mirror's surface, images formed and dissolved. The founding of Silvercrest, the original covenant between the royal line and the moonstones, the harmony of early society, where Alpha and Omega complemented rather than dominated one another. Then came the corruption, ambition poisoning what had been built, power concentrating in fewer hands. The great betrayal, orchestrated not by moonstones but by those who feared their influence as moderators of royal power. The moon bond was created as a fail-safe, Victoria narrated as the images shifted, a direct connection between royal blood and moonstone blood to be activated when the imbalance reached critical levels. It ensures that neither line can survive without the other, forcing cooperation instead of domination. But Marcus is dead, the king pointed out, the conspiracy exposed. Why does the goddess still demand sacrifice? Because killing one conspirator does not heal the systemic disease, Victoria replied. The hierarchy remains distorted. The bond between you was only the first step toward restoration. Now comes the crucial choice. The light in the temple intensified as the first ray of dawn touched the eastern horizon, creating the rare moment of balance when moon and sun shared the sky equally. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and within its depths appeared the face of a woman of such ethereal beauty and terrible power that Morgan knew instantly she gazed upon Selene herself. The covenant requires renewal, Victoria intoned, clearly serving as vessel for the goddess's words. The bond must be completed through willing sacrifice. One soul must pass beyond the veil, but not in death, instead transformed to serve as guardian between worlds. The king stepped forward, his expression resolute. Then I offer myself, as ruler, the responsibility for Silvercrest's wrongs falls to me. No, Morgan said, moving to stand beside him. Through their bond, she felt his determination, his belief that his sacrifice would restore proper order. But she also sensed something deeper in the goddess's demands, an intention specific to her bloodline. The sacrifice must come from me, she said with quiet certainty. The moonstone line was created to balance royal power, to serve as bridge between ruler and goddess. That purpose was interrupted but never ended. Victoria nodded slowly, confirmation rather than surprise in her ancient eyes. The goddess accepts your understanding. The choice must be freely made, with full knowledge of its consequences. What consequences? The king demanded, his hand closing around Morgan's arm as though to physically prevent her sacrifice. She will neither die nor truly live as mortals do, Victoria explained. Instead, she will exist between realms, able to cross the veil between physical and spiritual. The first true seer in generations, guardian of the renewed covenant. Morgan felt the rightness of this path with bone-deep certainty. Throughout her life, she had existed on boundaries between village and wilderness, between social belonging and isolation. This final transformation would simply make explicit what had always been implicit in her nature. "I accept," she said simply. The king's grip on her arm tightened. "Morgan, don't. We can find another way." Through their bond, she felt his resistance, his unwillingness to lose the connection they had forged. It surprised her, this attachment from a man who had once ordered her execution, but their shared journey had created something neither had anticipated, a bond transcending the magical mark that linked them physically. "There is no other way," she said gently. "You know this, if you look beyond what you want to what must be." The truth of her words reached him through their connection. His hand fell away, though reluctance shadowed every line of his face. "At least let me release you from our blood bond first," he said, "so you need not carry my immortality with you." Victoria shook her head. "The bond cannot be broken before the transformation. It is the channel through which the goddess will work her will." The moment of decision had arrived. Dawn light now entered the temple directly, creating a perfect beam that intersected with moonlight at the exact center of the altar. The lunar mirror pulsed with increasing brilliance, its surface showing not reflections, but a gateway to somewhere beyond physical reality. Morgan stepped onto the altar, feeling the convergence of energies around her like a physical embrace. The mark on her neck burned with silver fire, no longer painful but transcendent. Through it, the bond between her and the king stretched taut, vibrating with the tension of impending separation. "What must I do?" she asked Victoria. "Place your blood upon the mirror," the seer instructed. "Then speak your acceptance of transformation." Morgan drew the moonstone dagger, its blade catching light from both sun and moon. With steady hands, she cut her arm deeper than before, allowing blood to pool in her cupped hand. As she held it above the mirror's surface, she looked one last time at King Alaric. "Remember your promise," she said. "Restore balance to Silvercrest. Make my sacrifice meaningful." He nodded once, unable to speak, the bond between them transmitting emotions too complex for words. Grief and gratitude, regret and respect, all flowing between them in these final moments of connection. Morgan turned back to the mirror and let her blood fall onto its surface. Instead of staining the silver, the droplets seemed to sink into it, creating ripples that expanded outward like stones dropped in still water. "I, Morgan Moonstone, last of my bloodline, accept transformation and service to the covenant between Selene and Silvercrest," she declared, her voice steady despite the power building around her. "Neither fully living nor truly dead, I will stand as guardian between worlds, ensuring balance for generations to come." The words acted as key to a lock sealed for centuries. The mirror's surface erupted in blinding silver light that engulfed Morgan completely. Pain beyond anything she had experienced surged through her body, cellular and spiritual simultaneously, breaking her down to fundamental essence before rebuilding her according to new patterns. Through it all, the bond remained, an anchor to physical reality as her consciousness expanded to encompass perspectives no living wolf had ever witnessed. She saw the weaving of fate across generations, the delicate balance of forces that sustain Silvercrest, the wounds in that balance inflicted by centuries of distortion. When the light finally receded, Morgan stood transformed. Her physical appearance remained largely unchanged, but those present could see the difference immediately. Her eyes now held the same silver luminescence as the moonbond mark, which had expanded from her neck to trace patterns across her skin like living tattoos. An aura of otherworldliness surrounded her, subtle but unmistakable. She could see differently now, perceiving not just physical reality, but the spiritual energies that underlay it. King Alaric appeared to her as both the man she had known and the manifestation of his royal lineage stretching back through time. Victoria and Eleanor showed as vessels of divine connection. Though Victoria's light flickered, suggesting her long service approached its natural end. Most significantly, she could still feel the bond between herself and the king, though transformed from its original nature. No longer a simple connection of shared mortality, it had become a conduit through which balance could flow between royal authority and divine will, exactly as the original covenant had intended. "It is done," Victoria announced, her voice weak with exhaustion from channeling such power. "The covenant is renewed." The supernatural light that had filled the temple began to fade, returning to normal dawn illumination. The lunar mirror, its purpose fulfilled, now showed only ordinary reflections, though its power remained for future need. Morgan stepped down from the altar, adjusting to the strange sensation of existing simultaneously in physical reality and somewhere beyond it. The king approached cautiously, uncertainty in his expression. "Morgan, are you still yourself?" She smiled, the expression warming features that might otherwise have seemed too otherworldly. "I am myself, but more. I see things differently now, but my core remains." He reached out hesitantly, then drew back. "The bond feels changed." "It is. We are no longer bound by shared mortality, but by shared purpose." She held out her hand, palm up in invitation. "You can touch me. I haven't become a ghost." His hand closed around hers, warm and solid. Relief washed across his face, transmitted through their transformed connection. "What happens now?" Before she could answer, Eleanor approached, bowing deeply before Morgan in a gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable days earlier. "The goddess has spoken through her actions," the high priestess said. "Morgan Moonstone now stands as first seer of the renewed covenant, advisor to the throne, and interpreter of divine will." "First among equals," Morgan corrected gently. "The restoration of balance means no single voice should dominate others. The council must be reformed to include representatives of all ranks, Alpha through Omega." The king nodded thoughtfully. "Beginning with the public exoneration of the Moonstone line and acknowledgement of the true history of the Great Betrayal. The lunar mirror will help establish that truth beyond question," Victoria added, looking frail but satisfied as she joined them. "My time as seer draws to its natural close, but I live to see the covenant renewed. It is more than I dared hope." The morning progressed with a strange mixture of the mundane and the miraculous. Word spread throughout the palace and then the city of the supernatural events at the temple. The king called an emergency session of the remaining council members, presenting the lunar mirror as evidence, while Morgan explained her transformation and new role. Some accepted these revelations more readily than others, but none could deny the visible evidence of divine intervention. Plans were made for a formal ceremony to announce the changes to the wider kingdom, including the reformation of the social hierarchy toward its original balanced design. By evening, exhaustion had claimed even the most energetic participants in the day's events. The king retired to his private chambers, while arrangements were made for Morgan to occupy the traditional quarters of the first seer, unused for generations, but still maintained as part of palace tradition. Before seeking rest, however, Morgan felt drawn to the palace battlements. From this vantage point, she could see the entirety of Silvercrest spreading below, from the palace at its heart to the distant border regions where her journey had begun. The moon rose full and bright, speaking to her now in ways she was only beginning to understand. She sensed rather than heard the king's approach, their bond alerting her to his presence before his footsteps reached her ears. "I thought you would be resting," he said, coming to stand beside her at the parapet. "My nature has changed," she explained. "Rest means something different now. I find renewal in moonlight more than sleep." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city below as lamps were lit in windows, creating constellations of human activity to mirror the stars appearing above. "I've been thinking about what you asked before the challenge with Marcus," the king said finally, "about what would happen to you when your purpose was fulfilled. I didn't have an answer then. And now? Now I understand that your purpose has expanded rather than concluded." He turned to face her directly. "You asked once if you would always be a prisoner. The answer is emphatically no. You are now essential to Silvercrest's future, not as captive, but as cornerstone." Morgan appreciated the acknowledgement, though her transformed perspective had already moved beyond such concerns. "The goddess showed me many possibilities during my transformation," she said. "Some paths lead to prosperity for Silvercrest, others to continued struggle. Which manifests depends on choices yet to be made by many wolves, not just you or me. Can you see which path we're on now?" She smiled at the very human question from a king accustomed to certainty. "That isn't how divine sight works. I see possibilities. probabilities. But the future remains unwritten. She turned her gaze toward the northern border, where darkness gathered deeper than mere night. I can tell you this much, however. The rogues who followed Marcus were merely one faction of a larger threat gathering beyond our borders. The king followed her gaze, instantly alert to the implied warning. What kind of threat? Something older than our current troubles. A power that has waited for Silvercrest to weaken through internal division before striking. She touched the mark on her neck, which now extended in silver patterns across her collarbone like delicate branches. It's why the goddess intervened now, why the covenant needed renewal. United, Silvercrest can withstand what comes. Divided, we would fall. Understanding dawned in the king's expression. The sacrifice wasn't just about correcting historical wrongs. It was preparation for conflict to come. All things serve multiple purposes in the goddess's design, Barbara Morgan confirmed. My transformation allows me to see dangers approaching from both physical and spiritual realms. The implications settled between them, adding weight to decisions already made and choices yet to come. The reformation of Silvercrest's social structure, the integration of Omegas into positions of influence, the healing of divisions between royal authority and spiritual guidance are now revealed as not merely matters of justice, but practical necessities for survival. We begin tomorrow, the king decided, his voice taking on the tone of royal declaration rather than conversation. The public ceremony announcing these changes can't wait for elaborate preparation. The kingdom must unite quickly if threats gather, as you sense. Morgan nodded agreement. Victoria is preparing the necessary rituals. Eleanor has already begun informing the temple hierarchy. By midday, we can address the people. Their efficiency pleased him. She could feel it through their bond. The connection between them had evolved into something neither had anticipated when fate first linked their lives. Not the forced bond of potential enemies, nor the emotional attachment that had begun to form during their journey, but a partnership of equals with complementary strengths. There's one matter we haven't discussed, the king said, hesitation coloring his tone for the first time. The nature of our continuing bond. Morgan understood his concern. It no longer binds our mortality, but it does connect us more deeply than ordinary alliance. You wonder if this compromises your independence as ruler. Or yours as seer, he added. She considered this carefully before answering. I believe the goddess designed it precisely to prevent either of us from acting without awareness of the other's perspective. A check on power rather than a limitation of it. Balance in all things, he mused, repeating a phrase that had appeared repeatedly in the ancient texts Victoria had studied with them, including between crown and covenant. Exactly, we need not fear the connection unless we seek to misuse it. Morgan turned from the view of the city to face him fully. In her transformed sight, she could see the complex patterns of possibility surrounding him, paths branching and reconnecting based on choices yet unmade. One path glowed brighter than others, a future where king and seer worked in harmony to rebuild what centuries of distortion had damaged. Not without conflict or challenge, but with shared purpose that transcended individual ambition. We have been given a rare opportunity, she said, to correct the course of history, to restore what was lost, to prepare for trials to come. I accept my role in this. Do you accept yours? The king straightened, meeting her silver gaze without flinching. Through their bond flowed his answer before he spoke it aloud, a commitment that resonated with the same certainty she had felt upon the altar. I accept, he said simply. Whatever comes, we face it together. Morgan nodded, satisfaction warming her, despite the cool night air. She turned back toward the northern horizon, where her enhanced senses detected subtle movements in the darkness beyond Silvercrest's borders. The coming conflict would test their renewed covenant in ways neither could fully predict. But for the first time since the execution that never happened, she felt something beyond mere purpose or duty. Hope, fragile but genuine, that the broken pieces of history might be reassembled into something stronger than what had been lost. The moon climbed higher, bathing the battlements in silver light that seemed to answer the patterns glowing beneath her skin. Fate had marked her, transformed her, set her on a path she could never have imagined from the isolation of her village existence. Yet somehow, standing between worlds as the literal embodiment of balance, Morgan Moonstone had found her true home at last, not in a place, but in a purpose. Not a but connected, not ending, but beginning. The goddess writes in circles, not lines. Someday another would stand where she now stood, facing choices that echoed across generations. When that time came, Morgan would be ready, guardian of a covenant renewed through sacrifice and strengthened through truth. Until then, she would watch and wait and prepare Silvercrest for the shadows gathering beyond its borders. The execution pyre that should have been her end had instead ignited a transformation that even now continued to unfold in ways neither goddess nor mortal could fully predict. The Alpha King's mark had begun as a sentence of shared mortality. It had become something far greater, a symbol of shared destiny, not just for two souls bound by divine decree, but for a kingdom poised between past failures and future possibilities. And in that balance, exactly as the goddess intended, lay the seed of renewal for all.